Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Casual Criminalist. We are taking a deep breath today because this one's going to get dark. We're talking about John Wayne Gacy, more famous, infamous, obviously not famous, infamous, Simon, come on, get it right. He was the dude who killed people and wore clown makeup, and that's basically what I knew him as. And I've even made a video about this guy before on my channel Biographics, where I do biographies of famous people. Check it out if you want to. David, who wrote this script, was like, Simon, there's more to this. It's a lot darker than you think. And I was like, how dark? And he's like, oh boy, you're not going to have a good time. And I mean, he's like, I hope you enjoy my writing, but this one is horrible. Like really, really horrible. It's also really, really long. David kind of took it upon himself. He was like, I am going to write the most definitive piece on Gacy that exists or as a video on the internet.
It's about 3 hours.
I'm scared because I think if I die, I might really miss you.
He's like, this will be YouTube's biggest, most in-depth Gacy video. And I was like, that sounds pretty exciting and horrible and absolutely something that will get horribly demonetized. But that's what we do on this show. We make stuff. And I'm like, well, if it's not getting demonetized, it's not bad enough, is it, Simon? That's the motto here. Oh my God, please support our sponsors. So this is John Wayne Gacy, the demonic killer clown. Look, we got 39 pages to get through. What happens if you're new here, I should probably explain the format, is David has written this for me. I've not read it before. I hope you enjoy it. This podcast is, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, hello there. Subscribe, like, or maybe dislike this one. It's not going to be likable. Let's get into it. It was the evening of the 26th of July, 1976. A young man, David Cram, aged only 18, stood by the side of the road on Elston Avenue in a rather sketchy part of Chicago, Illinois. A silver Oldsmobile pulled up alongside him. The ugly-looking 1970s station wagon was driven by an equally unsightly man, dumpy, obese, and greasy-looking, and roughly his mid-30s, and sporting a rather weak porn-star/pedo moustache. John Wayne Gacy leaned across the passenger seat and offered Cram a ride. This is, also, I should point out, David was like, I am going to assassinate this guy, like his character. I mean, no one's like John Wayne Gacy. He's got a great character that needs assassinating. No. But David like took it upon himself to make it his mission to destroy this guy. And already we are there.
Do not hesitate. Show no mercy.
There's something about the word greasy, isn't there? It's like, yeah, obese, sure. Weird moustache, sure, but greasy. It's like, not nice. It turns out that Gacy and Cram were not headed in the same direction, but Cram noticed a sign in the back window of the car that said PDM Contractors. Cram, always eager for work, asked the driver, hey buddy, how'd you get into construction? What kind of money does that work pay? Gacy replied, I started the company myself. If you're looking for work, I could offer you $3.66 an hour. The 66 cents would go towards taxes, and you'd have $3 an hour to spend. Wait, when is this? 1976. So that's obviously more today. Although it's not a lot different from what I got paid when I worked at a store when I was 16. I think it was like £3.80 or something an hour when I was 16, which seems like super low nowadays. That doesn't even buy you a beer. Not that I was 16 and that I could drink beer legally. Have I told this story before? It's like a friend of mine. He's like one of these guys that'll just ask anyone anything. And I wasn't there, but he's just walking. He told me this story. He's just walking along in London. He lives in London, and he's just like walking along, and he sees a guy in a Rolls Royce, and just sitting in a car in the Rolls Royce, smoking a cigar. And he's like, "Oh my God, who smokes a cigar inside a Rolls Royce? Who cares so little about their Rolls freaking Royce that they're smoking a cigar inside it?" So he goes up, he knocks on the window. The guy winds down the window, and my friend asks, what do you do for a living? And oh my God, I just realized this is exactly like those TikTok videos you now see where people do this and publish it on TikTok. I just realized this story became a lot less interesting since that actually became a thing. But he just asked this guy what he did for a living. Because my friend's like, he's one of these guys who'd like, you know, he definitely aspires to own a Rolls Royce. He's this guy. And he just asked him, what do you do for a living? And the guy just says, I've been playing the lottery my whole life. And last week I won, didn't I? And I'm just like, oh no, that sends such the wrong message. It's not like, oh, it's not working hard. He just won the lottery. And that's why he's smoking a big cigar inside his brand new roller. Ah.
You won your freedom?
Absolute freedom.
While not an exorbitant wage, that was pretty good for unskilled labor in 1970s Chicago, and David Cram wasn't exactly bursting with prior experience. Gacy gave Cram his phone number and said, "Give me a call if you're interested." Then the clunky station wagon pulled away and disappeared, heading north down Elston Avenue. A couple of hours later, Cram dialed Gacy's number from a payphone in the back of a dive bar. Cram informed Gacy that he was interested in a job. 20 minutes went by while Cram sank a couple of beers. Another young man arrived, an employee of Gacy's, and the two set off northwest towards Chicago suburb of Des Plaines. Oh, David gave me a pronunciation. I think I got it right. Des Plaines. Yeah, I know it's got this weird American pronunciation because I'd want to say Des Plaines or Des Plaines or something French. But David specifically says this is the Yankee pronunciation. Thank you, David. The two arrived at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. David's poking fun at me because he says, "How do you pronounce 8213?" And he says 8213 because there was a previous video where I kept saying like 7210 something Avenue. And everyone in the comments was like, "Simon, just say it like this, 8213. It's much easier." And it is. And yeah, now I understand. Thank you, Americans. But I still think you could have more streets with less numbers. Like, that's a really big street. I live at number 8, and I live in a city. So, allegedly, I live at number 8. You don't know what street I live on, so that's okay. We'll keep that secret. This was the house of John Wayne Gacy. A gaggle of teenage boys were loitering outside the front of the house as Gacy chatted away idly to them. That's a weird scene. David Cram got out of the vehicle and walked up to Gacy. They shook hands. "Glad to have you aboard," Gacy said pompously. Is this all happening in the middle of the night? This is so strange because we started off in the evening, then he went to the bar and had a couple of drinks, and then as the evening's gone by, he's gone to Gacy's house to do some work after having a couple of beers. This is all happening very fast. And what sort of work are you doing at the middle of the night on the first day you meet someone without any, I don't know, doesn't a job take a few days to get started? I feel like. He explained that they had a last-minute job to do that evening, painting a hot dog stand. The other boys on the job piled onto a pickup truck and headed off. Gacy, meanwhile, instructed David to hop into the Oldsmobile with him. They were alone together for the ride. On the way, Gacy did most of the talking. He lied to Cram that he had an undergraduate degree in sociology and another degree in psychology. This was utter bullshit. Gacy had neither such degree. Nevertheless, Gacy opined, the psych degree is good to have in the construction business because it allows you to manipulate people. You plant a seed in someone's head and you let it grow like a forest. This is a weird conversation to have when you first meet someone. Gacy went on to exaggerate that because if someone says that to me, I'm not immediately thinking, "Oh wow, you're so smart." I'm thinking, even if you do know this, then I don't know you well enough to be your friend, so you're probably using this against me.
It's hard to believe that fear of offending him is stronger than the fear of pain, but you know what? It is.
Gacy went on to exaggerate his construction company was projected to earn somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in profit in 1976 alone. Good lord, that's a lot of money. Especially in 1976 money, which is between $2.5 and $5 million in today's money. Okay, there we go. And yet the owner of PDM Contractors was headed off that night with a bunch of teenagers to paint a hot dog stand. Gacy explained to Cram that if he proved himself a reliable worker, he'd get a much greater salary than the starting rate. "You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours." Gacy winked. It was at this point that Gacy clumsily worked into the conversation that he was bisexual. He added that he had a bunch of booze back at 8213 Somerdale Avenue and that he regularly had his workers round for drinks after the job was done. Dude, this is getting so weird. I mean, I don't know, I can imagine being broke and getting a job working construction, and you're like, okay, it's a bit weird, but I need some money to pay for my beers, and look, if the guy wants me to start now, I'll start now and get paid tonight. Hell yeah. And then I'm sitting in this car with this dude, and I'll be like, what? It's like, okay, yeah, let's go to the hot dog stand. I'm definitely going to paint that hot dog stand and not run away. And yeah, hard pass on the drinks later, mate. He also liked throwing cocktail parties for important local figures, he said. Graham, seeking a steady source of money, commented as little as possible about all of this. Yeah, exactly what I would be doing. I'll just be shutting my mouth. The crew painted the hot dog stand without incident, and Gacy joined in the work. The teenage boys were duly paid and sent on their way. Despite some of the creepier shit that Gacy came out with in conversation, David Cram kept working for PDM Contractors. One day, Gacy hired Cram to clean out his garage at 8213 Somerdale Avenue. There, Cram found a bunch of wallets and driver's licenses. Oh my god, dude. Like, John, mate, what are you doing? If you've been collecting people's driver's licenses as some trophy, because we all know where this is going, right? John Wayne Gacy is a serial killer. Spoiler alert, everybody. And if he's got a collection, if you're a serial killer and you're collecting like some slides like Dexter or driver's licenses, which does seem to be quite a common thing that people collect as serial killers, and then you bring someone around to clear out your garage, is that really a good idea to have those there?
Are you bragging?
I think if I discovered that, I'd be like, what is this? And then I'd go to ask the guy, and hopefully before I got there, I'd think twice, and then I'd open the garage, take the stuff, and go to the police station and tell them exactly what happened. Because that is some serial killer shit. If you find a collection of driver's licenses somewhere, leave the scene, doesn't matter where it is, even if it's someone you know well, and take it to the police station. Unless they, I don't know, run a fake ID business or something. In that case, there's an explanation. If not, there isn't one. Go to the police, okay? PSA over. Let's get back to the story. They all belong to young men. Cram found one of the men, age 21, whose picture vaguely matched Cram's description. Aged only 18, David Cram could not yet buy booze in the state of Illinois. Cram asked Gacy if he could take the driver's license so he could use it as a fake ID. He didn't ask, John, mate, where'd you get all these IDs? What the David? Is his name David? I already forgot. Yes. Good. Gacy laughed. Sure, I don't want to keep those wallets anyway. Those are all IDs left over from my work with the Syndicate, an organization of hitmen I occasionally work with. I don't kill people myself, mind you, but I sometimes help set up their targets. Oh, why are you admitting to your crimes?
I don't know if that's worth bragging about, do you?
Even if, I mean, look, you're not working for a group called the Syndicate. That's the most generic hitman squad that I've ever heard. But why would you admit this? David Cram wasn't quite sure whether to believe Gacy, since he had long established himself as a blowhard and a fantasist. But living in the rough side of Chicago, Cram was no stranger to talk of organized crime, and he had no love for the police, so Cram shrugged it off and pocketed the driver's license so he could get hammered that night. A month passed. On August the 21st, Gacy approached Cram with a proposal. Gacy had a few spare bedrooms at 8213 Summerdale. He told Cram that he'd rent him one for $25 a week. That would mean Cram could pay his rent with just a little over 1 day's work, and the rest of his weekly earnings could be spent on himself. Cram leapt at the idea and moved in without delay. The next day, August the 22nd, David Cram went out with friends to celebrate his 19th birthday. Cram got absolutely faced that night, along with smoking a couple of joints. Staggering in the front door of 8213 Summerdale around 1 a.m., Cram's eyes immediately landed on a fat clown, standing in the middle of the front room, his sinister, grinning face illuminated by the light of a single lamp. At that point, I'll be like, oh, good lord, how much did I drink? Pogo the clown stood at 5'10" and weighed 230 pounds, or that's 177 centimeters and 104 kilograms. Wow, so he's a chunky dude. His puffy clown suit was half solid red and the other half candy stripes of red and white. A couple of pom-poms of various colors hang off the suit as fake buttons. Pogo's collar was a white and red ruff shaped like an old tea doily. The clown also wore a red and white pointed cap, which was also adorned with multicolored pom-poms. While foundation was slathered on the clown's face, around his eyes were large triangles of light blue drawn at sharp angles and stenciled with black. The bottom half of the clown's face was painted bright red, with the corners sharply upturned into a facsimile of a ghoulish smile. The bright red had the effect of making Pogo's already yellow teeth look a shit-stained brown, and Pogo bore those putrid fangs at David Cram an exaggerated and psychotic grin. I'm just preparing for a charity event I've got tomorrow, Pogo explained in a deep, normal voice. David Cram blinked and nodded. Cram was already aware that John Wayne Gacy occasionally worked as a party clown, dressing up in a ridiculous and creepy outfit and going by the name Pogo the Clown. Okay, so that's going to be less weird if you know that he does it. Although why is he dressing up as it in the middle of the night would be another question. But as we've already established, John Wayne Gacy is a weird dude. Gacy continued to explain, I thought that given it was your birthday, it'd be rather cute if I left my costume on to greet you. Dude, that is weird. It's not cute. It's weird. You're a pudgy, middle-aged, greasy dude dressed up in a clown costume, and the 19-year-old, 20-year-old now, who's coming home from his birthday party, a little bit faced, doesn't want to see his weird landlord/boss dressed up in a clown costume. It's just psycho, mate. Stop it. That was a bit weird. Yes, it was. But Cram was drunk and didn't care. The two walked toward the living room at the back of the house where Gacy kept a massive bar. The clown poured the already sozzled birthday boy a shot of Everclear grain alcohol, which had a strength of 190 proof or 95%. What are you doing? It's like, hey, you want a shot of Everclear? It's like, why not just have a regular drink and just make it bigger, John? What's wrong with you? The two men also smoked some weed, and Gacy busted out the Valium. It was turning into a real party. Oh, you're mixing those no, not benzos. What's Valium? It's like a sedative, right? Mixing that with booze and weed, that's not going to lead to a good time. That's not going to lead to, or maybe it's going to lead to Gacy having a good, oh God, that's so, no. Let's not go there. A few more shots of Everclear later, and Gacy began playing around in his Pogo persona, his voice becoming high-pitched and cartoonish. The clown showed Cram some of his puppets that he used to entertain the kids. Pogo then offered to teach Cram an escape artist trick where one could escape from a pair of handcuffs. Maybe someday we'll need it. Pogo joked in a squeaky voice, giggling a little. Let's not do that. I don't want to do his creepy clown voice. I felt weird even doing that. Let's not do it. And it makes this funny, where this should just be really horrible. So let's not do that. You're just going to have to imagine it, dear viewer or listener. David Cram let Pogo cuff him. For a brief moment of silence, Pogo stared into Cram's eyes just inches from his face. The clown spoke. The trick to escaping a pair of handcuffs, Pogo laughed mockingly, is to have the key. Cram told Pogo to get the handcuffs off him. Instead, Pogo grabbed the handcuffs by the chain linking them together and started to spin around in circles, was forcing Cram to swing along with him as if they were playing Ring Around the Rosie. Pogo's bulky weight made it difficult for Cram to resist the spin. Get these the f*** off me! David Cram slurred with some difficulty. Pogo ignored him and they spun around yet another time. Then Pogo started to chant in a sing-song voice, I'm going to rape you. I'm going to rape you. Suddenly, Pogo let go of the handcuffs, and the dizzy David Cram staggered backward, bumping into the large TV in the living room. Pogo grinned at him, laughed, and charged forward. David Cram turned to the side and snapped off a quick high kick, which hit Pogo square in the face, snapping the clown's head backwards. The clown immediately collapsed into a massive, corpulent pile of blubber and brightly colored cloth. Wow, David Cram, he pulls out that karate move. Can you... That is quite impressive. He's a young dude against a fairly big guy, and I get the feeling David Cram's not a big guy. And he manages to get his leg up to 5'10" wasn't his height, or 5 foot something like that, and clock him in the face while drunk. David Cram, bit of a legend. Is David Cram the one that survives? Oh, I throughout this whole thing, I was like, oh my God, David Cram's going to get raped and then he's going to die. However, I think David Cram might survive, and he might be the one who takes him out and leads to the horrific discovery of the rest of John Wayne Gacy's crimes. Fingers crossed for you, David. You seem like a legend. David Cram scrambled over to where the handcuff keys now lay and unlocked himself. With a groan, Pogo raised himself again to his feet. Cram stood there with his fists at the ready. Pogo and his intended prey stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at each other. Pogo was no longer smiling. No words were exchanged, but it was clear to Cram that Pogo would not dare to make another attempt to rape the young man. For now. Cram quickly turned, ran to his bedroom, and barricaded the door. He was too drunk to consider leaving the house or going to the police. Despite the horrific incidents which had just occurred, David Cram had consumed enough alcohol, marijuana, and sedatives that evening to quickly drift into unconsciousness. As the teenager slumbered in a dreamless sleep, so too did the corpses of other young men, which rotted just a few feet below him, buried in the dirt of the crawl space beneath John Wayne Gacy's house. David Cram had no idea how close he'd come to joining them. It also makes me think that because we have quite a lot of details of this story, I don't think they come from John Wayne Gacy. It feels like David Cram's perspective. So I think David Cram might be telling this story. However, I said this once before, and then it turns out that I think it was a girl got murdered, and it was just the killer's story or witness's story and stuff. And maybe it was David. I think David had put it in the first person just to mess with me. I was like, you bastard. I was like, at least she survives. And then she didn't. Meet John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was born on March the 17th, 1942 in Chicago to parents John Sr. and Marion Gacy. He was the middle child of the family and the only son. His older sister, Joanne, was born 2.5 years previously, and his younger sister, Karen, would be born in 1944. His father, John Sr., was the son of Polish immigrants whose name was originally Gatza before it was anglicized to Ellis Island as Gacy. John Sr. was a veteran of World War I, and he later worked as an auto mechanic and local handyman. John Sr. was thoroughly assimilated into American culture and behaved like a typical Chicago blue-collar working stiff. His wife, Marion, was an American of Scottish and Danish descent and lived quietly as a housewife, raising her 3 kids. The baby John was named after his father, but also the movie star John Wayne, in the hopes that the actor's masculinity and grit would rub off on the boy. It didn't, much to his father's bitter chagrin. Oh no, here we go. It's going to be a classic story, isn't it? Here we go. John Sr. is definitely going to bully, maybe abuse his son. Because, I mean, look, serial killers, horrible people like this, the psychos, they're born and they're made, I think is like something I've learned from. I mean, some are just born and some are just made, but generally it's a combination. John Sr. was a drunk and a violent one at that. Absolutely no surprises here. In 1944, when John was just 2 years old and his younger sister Karen had just been born, the family were sitting around the dinner table. Suddenly, an inebriated John Sr. picked up some hot food and threw it in his wife's face and then punched her savagely, instantly breaking Marion's nose and knocking her off her chair. Dude, you need to be shot. John and his 4-year-old sister Joanne started screaming. Marion Gacy got off the floor, blood streaming down her face, and bolted out of the house. She began running for her life. John Sr. only broke off the chase when a neighbor intervened. Instead, John Sr. went back into the house, collected a gun he stashed there, and took off without a word for a few days of heavy drinking. Oh my god. Marion Gacy went and stayed with her brother for a few days while she investigated her options for separating from John Sr. Good for her. The terrible thing is, because like there's this victim mentality, what's the word? Like, where women don't leave. And like in this, I almost expected Marion to go back and just get more physical abuse, which is so crazy. So good for her for getting out of that. Back in the 1940s, the support system for single mothers wasn't that good. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons. It's hard, back in the day, getting divorced and stuff, that's not easy. And then you've got kids and women were working much less back in the day. So where's the money going to come from if the husband's not going to support? And yeah, it was a super screwed up situation. The support system for single mothers wasn't very good. And Marion's brother said that he could not support two families. So Marion went back to John Sr. Oh God, never mind. I take it back. And they reconciled. Marion herself said that she never learned what led to John Sr.'s violent outburst that night. And it wouldn't be the last. John Sr., surely that's not the first. To just escalate from nothing to that so quickly would be insane. John Sr. was physically abusive to all three of his children. Of course he was, the girls as well as his son. His disciplinary tool of choice was a leather strap that he used to maintain his straight razor for shaving. The thick leather strap hung on the wall of the kitchen. It was double-layered and it was heavy. John Sr. used it as a flogging device for even the slightest infraction or mistake. He also used it to drive home a moral lesson, or after he had won an argument, even when the children had done nothing wrong. Because John Sr. was also a drunk during those floggings, it was not used sparingly. When John Wayne Gacy was 4 years old, he was lured to a field, undressed, and molested by a 15-year-old girl with Down syndrome. Wait, he was molested or he molested? He was lured to a field, undressed, and molested by a 15-year-old girl. Okay, so he was the one. Oh, because he was 4. Oh my god. That's... Whoa. He was 4? What is up? This caused an uproar in the Gacy household that the young John did not quite understand. Meanwhile, of course he didn't understand, he was 4. Meanwhile, the sexual assault was quietly internalized by John's fragile psyche. That same year, John was watching his father repair a car, and the young boy picked up an engine part to try and hand it to his dad. Despite being just 4 years old, he was thoroughly beaten with the thick leather strap for messing up the car parts that his father had carefully laid out. In 1948, when John was 6, he stole a toy truck from a store. His mother, Marion, made John take the truck back and confess to his crime. Okay, so far so good. I mean, he's 6. He can steal if he wants to. But, he doesn't understand. So take him back, an apology, great. She later told her husband, at which point the young John was beaten so brutally that Marion started to refrain from informing her husband about the boy's misdeeds. Good for you, Marion. Yeah, I wouldn't either. When John was 7 years old, he was discovered naked with a neighborhood boy and the boy's sister. John and the neighbor boy were both molesting the young girl. Dude. John was again brutally beaten by his father. Also, when John was 7, he was regularly sexually abused by a work colleague of his father. Oh my god, no wonder this dude is so screwed up. This is a crazy story. He was taken on car rides, engaged in quote-unquote wrestling with the man, and the situation always devolved into inappropriate touching and the man forcing the boy to fillet him. What the f***? John's father never found out about these particular incidents because John Jr. was fearful of being punished by his father if he told him. I know this isn't his father's fault. This is the f***ing predator's fault. But if there was a healthier environment at home, then he could tell him, and that other guy could hopefully go to prison for a very long time. John's father never found out about these. Essentially, John Sr.'s abuse had cowed his son into silence, even when he desperately needed to ask for help against a rapist pedophile. John's abuse is 7 years old. 7. John's abuse-driven timidness affected his schooling. He became drumpy and paranoid about a strange collection of things. He was afraid of loud noises and the sirens of fire trucks. He was afraid of urban myths, crime reports from the news, and tall tales for which John was relentlessly teased and bullied by his classmates as a fraidy cat. That being said, John was a kind, friendly sort of boy, and he did make a few loyal friends. Most of them felt sorry for him, and they regularly stuck up for John. Nice. Those sound like good kids. As a child, John Wayne Gacy was interested in animals, in gardening, and in building things. He was fat, he was in poor health, and he had no interest in sports, which disgusted his father. In his early years, Gacy hung out in a treehouse that had built in an empty lot next to his home. Then, when construction workers came round to build on the empty lot, the treehouse had to come down. The construction workers kindly left tearing down the treehouse till the last moment so the boy could enjoy it for as long as possible. But when it eventually came down, John Sr. beat his son till the boy bled for the disgraceful offense of crying at the loss of his treehouse. John Sr., you're a real piece of shit. I mean, also, we know John Jr. turns out to be a piece of shit, but at this point in his life, John Jr. is just being up in pretty much every way possible. John Jr. built a second hideout under the porch of his house, and he spent a lot of time there hiding from his father. From that point forward, the idea of concealing things below a house held a fascination for him. This subconscious association may have been doubled by the fact that his father, John Sr., spent most of his time in the basement, not allowing anyone to disturb him, while he got roundly shit-faced all afternoon until it was time for dinner. Again, in 1949, the same year of his repeated sexual abuse by his father's work colleague, John was caught stealing his mother's underwear. One evening, when John Sr. and Marion were dressing up to go somewhere, Marion found her underwear drawer was empty. The garments were found in a paper bag that John Jr. had hidden in a hideout under the porch. Again, John was severely beaten by his father. Ah yes, the classic beat the weirdness out of him. Great work, Dad. Great work. Later, when John was a teenager, his mother Marion would make him wear her underwear as a quote-unquote punishment. This was worse than it may seem. His mother's punishment was cruelly psychological, since she'd make John sit in his room wearing nothing but her underwear, fearful that his penis shamefully erect until his father came home. If John Sr. saw his son, he would be in for the beating of a lifetime. However, Marion never went into details of John's infractions to her husband and kept her own brand of punishment secret from her spouse. Okay, Marion isn't a bad person. Marion's just super misguided. Like, this was back in the day. And they had also, I don't know, like punishment and stuff. I feel like that's come a long way, like how we treat our children. And I think this kind of psychological punishment wasn't really like established as damaging people so much back in the day, was it? And now it's like, well, obviously this is not good. I just don't want to be too hard on Marion. I feel really bad for Marion. Also, during John's teenage years, he graduated from the leather strap in the kitchen to John Sr. frequently punching him in the face and kicking him while his son lay in agony on the ground. John never tried to resist his father's beatings. So unlike many accounts of Gacy, it's clear that he was abused by both his parents, though John Sr. definitely took the lead. Yeah, okay, I know it is abuse. I know that that's psychologically traumatic and stuff. But also Marion has her own shit going on. I mean, Jesus Christ, living in this situation. I don't know. I still feel sorry for Marion. I've no and at this point I feel sorry for John Wayne freaking Gacy. Because John Sr. Gacy is such a massive dirt. Man. I feel like this is one of the worst upbringings that we've ever seen on the Casual Criminalist, which is probably why it led to one of the worst serial killers that we've seen on the Casual Criminalist. In many cases, Marion took sides with her son against John Sr. and tried to shield the timid boy from his father's drunken abuse. John Wayne Gacy's parents certainly were not allies in their abuse of him, yet they were both abusive, all the same, in different ways. Yet John never really denounced them for it. He'd always make excuses for them and claimed that he loved them, though he would later opine that there was a thin line between love and hate. That sounds like something people say but doesn't really make any sense. I don't think that makes sense. John would always justify his father's behavior, saying, quote, "I was never good enough for him. He was always trying to make me better, to teach me with punishments." That is such an insane sentence. I get that punishment can work, but this isn't punishment. This is physical abuse and psychological abuse. You can't teach people with abuse. When it came to his mother, John could not praise the woman highly enough. The two were extremely close, driven to each other by their mutual victimization by John Sr. and also by Marion's perverse and psychologically abusive routine of sexual humiliation and feminization. Of course, the patriarch of the family did not like the fact that his son was so close to his mother, saying that, quote, "That mama's boy will probably grow up to be a queer. Although Marion Gacy tried to protect her children from their father, she was also his enabler. As is far too common with the spouses of violent drunks, Marion cooked up wild justifications for her husband's excessive abusiveness. She told her family and the neighbors that John Sr.'s violent outbursts were the result of a medical condition. According to Marion, he had a blood clot in his brain. When John Sr. drank, his inflamed blood vessels pressed against the blood clot, restricting blood flow, making him go a bit crazy. Then it's still his fault, and he needs to get off the sauce, doesn't he, Marion? Stop making excuses for him. Although it's not your fault, you are a huge victim in all of this. Even though you are, some abuse going on, you are way, way more victim than abuser. The best thing one could do, argued Marion, was not to agitate him further, just agree with whatever he had to say, so you did not send him into a rage. Now, the best thing, stop drinking. Or, he doesn't have a blood clot in his brain. He's just an abusive, violent drunk who's a psycho, and he can off. If this story sounds somewhat delusional to you, rest assured that this is not even the most outlandish justification that I've heard an enabler give for their violent spouse. I once heard a woman who lives just down the street from me give justifications to a bartender as to why her husband nearly beat a man to death in the restroom of a local pub. Apparently, it was a tragic misunderstanding and her husband was a good guy, really, and it was mostly the man's fault for his head knocking a sink off the wall. You see, the other man had bumped into her husband aggressively at the bar. As far as I know, husband and wife are still together with a troubled teenage son, and this is in the 2020s, not the 1940s and 1950s. Yeah, it's like, guys, I don't know. Like, this violent thing, I don't know, I'm not... it just, from someone who's not a violent person, I've never been in a fight. I've never beaten anyone up. And it's just like I guess I just don't understand that, like... But I also, like, I'll rage. Like, I'll get super angry at something, and I've definitely broken plenty of items. But, like, to do that to a person just seems quite alien to me. But I guess, like, just some people are wired that way. But it's like, God, you got to rein it in, don't you? Jesus. If there's any reasonable excuse for John Sr.'s violent outbursts beyond the fact that he was a massive alcoholic, it's the theory that John Sr. suffered from PTSD after his time in World War I, and that he had adopted binge drinking as a coping mechanism. Yeah, now that sounds like an actually reasonable explanation rather than he's got some special blood clot. I don't think that's how blood clots work. It's ridiculous. Why can't we just be like, he's super fucked up from World War I? I guess because they didn't have being super fucked up from World War I as a thing. They were just like, grin and bear it, you'll be fine. Nothing happens. The war's over. You're a good boy. It's like, oh my God. PTSD is real. A habit he retained as he became a husband and a father decades later. Combined with his alcoholism, recurrent memories of the war may have set off John Sr.'s temper, though to be honest, there are enough violent drunks in the world who don't have such an excuse, so it's more than likely he was just a nasty piece of work. I don't know. I think serving in World War I was trenches and gas and all sorts of unimaginable horror. It's not an excuse for his behavior. It certainly doesn't excuse him beating his children, but it does offer something of an explanation for him being quite as bad as he is. Or it's also, I mean, we don't know. Maybe his father was also abusive towards him, and it just perpetuates this cycle of abuse. Yeah, that's probably an unfortunate reality. In 1951, John Wayne Gacy allegedly gained a heart condition, causing him to have regular fainting spells from the age of 9 onward. He would fall unconscious for anywhere between 10 minutes to an hour. His medical condition also made John engaging in any strenuous physical activity impossible, so that ruled out any kind of sports. Naturally, having an already effeminate, timid, and quiet son who had been caught wearing women's underwear, constantly fainting and refraining from sports, gravely displeased John Sr. He accused his son of faking his medical condition because he was lazy, a coward, and a panty-waist. No matter how bad the fainting spells got, John Sr. never believed that they were real. John Wayne Gacy later said that, quote, "I was a disappointment to my dad because I was weak and he was strong. He hated a weak person, even weak emotions, and physical illness, even when it couldn't be helped, was a weakness." In 1957, at the age of 15, John began complaining of severe stomach pains. His father, again, accused him of faking. In reality, John's appendix had burst and the boy nearly died. Oh, good Lord. It's like, Dad, my tummy really hurts. Getting your appendix almost bursting out, as I understand, is incredibly painful. So, and then apparently it bursts, and I'm probably just basing this on like an episode of House I saw back in the day, but apparently then it bursts and you're like, but that's really bad news, because then a bunch of bacteria is entering your body from your intestine. It shouldn't be doing that. It's a bad time. When Gacy was 11, his father invited him to go fishing. This was a tremendous honor for John Jr., since there was nothing his father liked more than going fishing. It was a clear opportunity for father and son to bond. Oh my god, at that point I'll be like, no, Dad, I'm sorry, but you've beaten me so much that I don't want to do that anymore. Although I know that's not reality, because John Sr. is an adult and John Jr. is a kid, and kids want to please their parents. I guess at certain ages and stuff, and then they definitely don't at points when they become teenagers. But yeah, I mean, while you don't understand it as an adult, you're like, okay, he was 11. But it began raining heavily, so John Sr. began drinking heavily as well. Of course, I mean, whenever it rains outside, I have a drink. It's like any excuse. Jesus. He began hurling verbal abuse at his son for the slightest mistake, and even if the boy began fidgeting. The fact that they did not make a single decent catch of the trip somehow became his son's fault. The following year, John Jr. was disinvited by his father, and he was never asked to go fishing again. John nevertheless did his best to impress his father throughout his adolescence, but nothing was ever good enough. His father, already an unpleasant misanthrope, absolutely loathed his son. In 1958, a 16-year-old John was playing cards and drinking a couple of beers with a few friends in a neighbor's basement. John passed out, and when he was later revived, John began having some sort of fit, kicking and screaming. As a result, he was placed in a straitjacket and taken to the hospital, where he spent a month being examined by doctors, and his violent fits became so frequent that he was briefly threatened with being permanently committed to a mental health ward. Wait, you can't permanently commit someone to a mental health ward. It's like, what if they get better? It's a hospital. The point is to make people better. And it's like, yes, sure, some people will never leave because they have an untreatable mental condition. But what if that just suddenly something changes and they're like, no, I'm good. They'll be like, well, unfortunately, we're committed here perfectly, so you got to live with the crazy people for the rest of your life. Oh, great. That sounds illegal. This pleased his father. Of course it did. John Sr. to no end. You see, it ain't something physical. My son is just a degenerate who is up in the head. The young man was released soon after without serious psychological evaluation, but John Jr. made frequent returns to hospital. Between the ages of 14 and 18, he spent a total of 12 months in hospital beds, but the exact cause of his condition was never satisfactorily diagnosed by doctors. John's teenage years did not involve dating many girls or even surreptitiously hooking up with guys, since it was becoming pretty clear that he was bisexual. John had thoroughly suppressed his sexuality at the time due to childhood trauma and also due to the bizarre pseudo-fandom relationship that he had developed in his teenage years with his mother. Not that John Wayne Gacy was very much in demand. He had developed an appearance that one of his schoolmates would later liken to Mr. Potato Head. Yeah, also, it's like the 1950s? Yeah, 1950s, early 1960s. I don't think that, like, especially with John Sr. around being like, Dad, I'm bisexual. They'd be like, that is not going to go down a treat with your dad or with society, so no wonder he didn't come out. Of course he didn't. The past was the worst. As John approached his 18th birthday, although he never had the makings of a varsity athlete, John was more physically capable of standing up to his abusive father, who was at that point pushing 60 and had put himself through the ringer with a lifetime of hard drinking. One night, John Sr. had gotten horrendously drunk and was beating Marion. John yelled at him to stop. John Sr. turned and threw a punch at his son, but he was too drunk and the fist landed on a nearby refrigerator. The old man yelled in pain and then charged his son. John Jr., now weighing nearly 200 pounds or 90 kilograms, simply used his immense bulk to press his father up against the wall and hold him there. Father and son stood there, grappling in the kitchen for half an hour. They stood face to face as John Sr. struggled to get free and drunkenly threatened to kill his son. John Wayne Gacy later remembered the incident vividly. He said that he could remember his father's hot, booze-reeking breath hitting his face. He could remember tears streaming from his own eyes as he begged his father to stop. And John Wayne Gacy remembered one more thing. As he stood there, pressing his father up against the wall, Gacy remembered becoming incredibly, unbearingly, achingly aroused. Once his father's anger and energy subsided, Gacy released him and he hurried to his room, where he furiously masturbated. This is I imagine, obviously it's nature and nurture, as we said, it's a combination of two, but this is the most fucked up upbringing that I think we've ever seen. Like, we had Pedro Lopez, who was the big, like, that is the episode that I've struggled with the most, and I still think about how screwed up that whole thing was, and his upbringing was super screwed up. I think John Wayne Gacy is competing with Pedro for this, because this is not right. An attempt at a normal life. One of the things that John Wayne Gacy inherited from his monster of a father was his capacity for hard work. Gacy had held jobs since he was a child. When he was little, he ran a paper route and mowed his neighbor's lawn. In 1956, at the age of 14, Gacy got a job delivering groceries. He also volunteered around the neighborhoods, enacting household repairs for the elderly and people in need. It was clear from the start that John Wayne Gacy had a talent for being a tradesman, something that was fostered when Gacy transferred to a local vocational school where he became a star pupil. Gacy also served as a civil defense captain, an organization set up in the 1950s during the ineffectual duck and cover mentality of the early Cold War. Gacy's responsibility was to rush off as a first responder to fires, accidents, and disasters, or, God forbid, a nuclear war. Yeah, the 1950s are super intense. This is 1960s? Gotta be 1960s now, right? Early 60s. All these undertakings actually gained the otherwise troubled, timid, and sickly teenager quite a favorable reputation in his community. In 1960, when Gacy turned 18, he began getting involved in politics. Chicago was, and still is, a bastion to the American Democratic Party, with every Democratic mayoral candidate since 1931 being guaranteed election, regardless of how many scandals or allegations of corruption may plague their campaigns. And so, Gacy quickly realized which paymasters he should serve if he wanted to advance in the city. He got a job working for the Democratic candidate for the alderman of the 45th Ward. I have no idea what any of that means. Alderman, 45th Ward? Okay. American politics. Like, I have an understanding of the big picture of American politics. There's a president, there's a senate, there's a congress, and then it's like there's the alderman of the 49th Ward, and there's mayors and shit. Honestly, I don't even understand this in the UK. So, but it's a bit... never mind. It's some low-level politician at some point. Around the same time, Gacy, a nominal Catholic, got involved in the Holy Name Society. He began calling to reform the youth program since he felt that teenagers were getting tempted away from the church by sex, drugs, and rock and roll. In response, Gacy founded his own youth program, the Cairo Club, which held dances, get-togethers, seminars, and charity events. Gacy also volunteered to fix his local church, which was in constant need of maintenance, and spent much of his spare time playing cards with the parish priests. It was at this time that Gacy became effortlessly. That's the worst word. David has even put a pronunciation guide in here as a joke. He's got a little winky face next to it.
Don't listen to that man. He just said it to be mean.
Like effortlessly. God damn, that word. And effortlessly. Why is that word so impossible to say? It's almost as difficult as the word effortless. God damn it. It's like, why do you even try? And easily stay informed. And I still can't get it.
I knew I was saving myself for something this special.
It was at this time that Gacy became effortlessly charming. That word should not exist. I can say it alone, effortlessly. Can I? Why do I have such a nightmare with this goddamn word? Let's just move on. Sorry, totally irrelevant. I can't say that word. There's actually a sponsor read I do. And one of them, the top talking point is like, protect yourself, something, and effortlessly. The biggest thing that I like about HelloFresh is how effortless is it? How effortless. The biggest thing about HelloFresh for me is how easy it is. And every time I'm like, let's just use the word easily. Because it's easier to say, isn't it? It was also around this time that Gacy considered becoming a priest himself. He liked the idea of helping people, and he had still largely repressed his sexuality, which meant that the vow of chastity was no problem. Let me tell you about the Catholic Church several decades later, Gaso. And what trysts he did have had not gone spectacularly well. Once, when Gacy was still 18, he'd been making out with a girl in a discreet location. Things moved to second base, and before he knew it, Gacy had gotten the girl undressed, and it looks like Gacy was going to lose his virginity. Then he fainted. When Gacy regained consciousness, the girl was fully clothed again and freaking out because she did not understand what was happening. Needless to say, Gacy did not get laid that night. John's medical condition also got in the way of his schooling. At age 19, he still had not graduated from his vocational high school, despite his obvious talent as a tradesman. His illness caused him to take long breaks from school for months at a time, and his teachers were concerned about letting a student with a propensity for fainting work with heavy machinery. In short, Gacy had hit a wall, despite his recent progress, and he began to feel hopeless, trapped, and wretched once again. Yeah, this last page, I'm like, Gacy's turning his life around. He's taking... I mean, obviously we know how this ends. It ends with him becoming a complete psycho killer. But this, he's like, I'm considering being a priest. I found a skill that I'm good at. I like helping people. And it's like, oh my God, he's going to break the cycle. He's kind of gone from a horribly abusive, crazy, paedophile-filled childhood, and he's going to become a decent member of society. He's going to break the cycle. He's going to have his own kids, and he's not going to abuse them. Obviously, that isn't what happens, so let's carry on. Meanwhile, Gacy's festering bag of a father was up to his old tricks. John Sr. had bought Gacy a new car. Sounds like a rather nice thing to do, since his teenage son did not have the money to buy one on his own. You'd think that this was a nice thing for a father to do, but it only became another source of abuse. Since John Sr. had paid for it, he considered the car his until his son paid him off. Well, then he didn't buy him a car, he bought himself a car that he lets his son use. As such, John Sr. would randomly confiscate the keys at the smallest pretext. This carried on for years, and it made it difficult for Gacy to go to work, go to school, attend any of his volunteer obligations. In 1962, when Gacy was 20 years old, he became so frustrated that he simply got the car keys copied. Excellent move. And then he kept driving the car in defiance of his father. John Sr. responded by removing the distributor cap from the car's engine so that the thing wouldn't start, and he kept the cap for 3 days. Gacy, not realizing he could just buy a replacement, got so agitated that he fell ill. Yeah, this is the thing, he doesn't... I feel like Dave's saying he didn't realize he could buy a replacement. How did he not know that? If someone took, some hose off my car or something, and it didn't start, I'd be like, alright, well, that's it. I guess I gotta take it, or get someone to pick it up and get it repaired, because I have no idea. I mean, although with modern cars, you open it up, and there's not an engine in there. There's just, a big plastic thing covering it, clearly implying that you're not supposed to go digging around in there. And I'd have no idea what to do. I'd be like, guess it just broke. I don't even know what a distributor cap is. Do cars even still have distributor caps? The same day that John Sr. returned the distributor cap, marrying Gacy asked her son to give her a ride home. Gacy did so, and upon dropping his mother off, he told her that he was going to get some air in the tires and drove away. She did not see him again for 3 months. Good for you. I mean, yeah. They'd be like, look, someone bought me my freedom, and I'm going to use this freedom to go the away. Gacy had decided that the only way to be free of the tyranny of his father was to break out on his own. He drove all the way to Las Vegas. There, without a high school diploma, Gacy got a job working for the Palm Mortuary. Gacy at first worked as an ambulance driver for the mortuary for a few days, but when his employers realized he was 20 years old instead of the minimum age for that job of 21, he was switched to the job of attendant in the morgue. His job was to help load and unload bodies and to fetch things. In order to save money, Gacy lived in the morgue and slept on a cot in the embalming room. Holy Aren't they going to be like, John, mate, you can't live in the morgue, and it's creepy that you chose to live in the embalming room, John. Why are you doing this? I mean, I know why you're doing it, but it's not allowed. Stop it.
You can't blame him for being weird.
During the night, Gacy conducted little experiments of his own on the corpses. Oh, God. Taking particular interest in the bodies of young men who had died prematurely. Oh, double God. The exact nature of Gacy's little experiments is unknown, but Gacy himself implied that they were sexual. All we know is after 3 months, Gacy found the work unsatisfying, and he called his mother to ask if his father would allow him to return home. Oh, John, no. Don, no. You were doing so well, and now you're becoming a weirdo again. And don't be like, Simon, people have kinks. I'll be like, yo. Yes, they do. Totally fine with that. Playing with the dead bodies in the mortuary is not something I'm okay with. That's not okay. Good Lord. Despite his shame at returning home, Gacy did not let the grass grow. He managed to bluster his way into Northwestern Business College despite not having a high school diploma, something unthinkable today. After taking a standard year-long certificate, he scored a job as a management trainee for a shoe company for $65 a week, or roughly $600 in today's money. What is that? 2,400 months 24? It's not bad. It's not good. It's like late 20s. That's not very good. It's not great. Not bad for a training program with minimum education, but not great either. Nevertheless, Gacy threw himself into the minimum education. He took a year of business school. And I guess they thought he had a high school diploma. I mean, okay, so minimum, it's not bad. It's not bad. And I guess it's a training program. So once you've completed the training program, the pay is probably going to be a lot better. Cool. Nevertheless, Gacy threw himself into the work and impressed his employers and his colleagues. Meanwhile, he moved out of his parents' abusive household and in with his aunt and uncle in Springfield, Illinois, but who were by all accounts well-adjusted, decent people. Gacy was finally free of the ego-blistering assaults of his father and the perverted coddling of his mother. Yeah, it's got to be super good to be out of there. It was like taking the first breath of fresh air as a fully fledged human being, rather than the malformed, quivering wretch that Gacy felt that he was during his entire childhood. Gacy began dating on a regular basis, increasingly being considered something of a catch, despite his superficial physical deficiencies and lack of stereotypical male grit. Didn't we say earlier they became effortlessly charming?
You did it!
No, you didn't.
He was volunteering, he was talking to the priests, all these adults and stuff. And I think, He might, what do we describe at the beginning? Kind of like, oh, this was when he got older, like greasy and overweight. And he's a big guy. He's a chunky guy. That charm, though, that charm does a lot. That can be a good thing. He also joined the United States Junior Chamber of Commerce, or the JCs. This was a young person's leadership organization that also functioned as a networking club. It was designed to instill the values of free enterprise, liberty, and public service. Numerous politicians and business magnates had moved through the JCs over the years, including US Presidents Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Gerald Ford, and Richard Nixon, along with businessman Howard Hughes, and my former patron of sorts, Bill Gates. What? David, you can't just throw that in there. You used to work for Bill Gates in some capacity? All right, maybe that'll get explained. Maybe not. Maybe that's just David sprinkling in another mystery of his life to leave us all interested. All right. The Wikipedia page listing notable US JCs is a bit fucking hilarious. Among its lists of just 24 grandees on the page are the names John Wayne Gacy and Edmund Kemper. What? Both serial killers. I'm not sure what this implies, though I'm fairly certain that several other people on the list, not to name names, are also psychopaths. Functioning psychopaths, in the same way that one could be a functioning alcoholic, but psychopaths all the same. Anyway, let's move on before we get sued for slander. Well, this must be a very large organization then. The United States Junior Chamber of Commerce. That feels just like anyone who could be interested in politics would join that. Like what do they call it? Like the Model UN or whatever? So it's got to be a lot of people, right? From all across the spectrum, because you got like Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan in there. I don't know what politics Gerald Ford has. Is Gerald Ford still alive? I know there's one president who's really old, and he's outlived like people who get... No, that's Jimmy Carter, isn't it? Jimmy Carter's still alive. Gerald Ford's probably dead. I get confused. It's perhaps illuminating that the JCs absolutely loved Gacy. He was charming, hardworking, and conformed to the core ideals of the networking organization to a T. In 1964, when Gacy was 22 years old, the JCs nominated Gacy as their quote-unquote key man for the month of April. The next year, Gacy was elected the vice president of the local chapter of the JCs and was declared an outstanding first-year member, and he attained third place as the most astounding member in Illinois. This guy sounds like he is on track. Like, okay, if we didn't know about the weird touching of the bodies in the morgue and his upbringing and all of this stuff, you'd be like, this guy is on track for a high office. Like, he's charming, everyone likes him, he's getting involved, he's doing all the right things. Things are obviously going to change, but this is so interesting. It just goes to show that one can express devotion to a set of ideals without actually believing in them. As we shall see, Gacy didn't give a toss about classic liberal ideals. He was merely interested in self-advancement. And he'd be far from the only politician or entertainer or anyone in the public. You know, people say they believe in a whole ton of stuff just because it gets them elected or it gets them popular or all of this stuff. I mean, it's a little, I don't know. It is what it is. He'd pay lip service to any prevailing set of societal morals, capitalism, Stalinist, fascist, or otherwise. It just happened that he lived in 1960s America. He was perfectly happy to parrot those ideals. As he put it himself, he drove himself hard during this time to prove his father wrong. That was his primary motivation. He was worth something. He could and would succeed. Gacy would obtain prominence no matter the cost, and he would have done so, as many psychopaths could have done, if his more subterranean appetites had not come slithering toward the surface. At the forefront of Gacy's demons were sexual damage and confusion. He had only been in Springfield 6 months before he married a co-worker of his, Marilyn Mars. Blinded by false hypergamy. It's a new word to me. Look up. Hypergamy. The action of marrying or forming a sexual relationship with a person of a superior sociological or educational background. There we go. I learned a new word today, which I'll soon forget. I always wish, when you look up a new word and you're like, oh, I wish I could use that, but I never do. And it's like, I learn these new words and then I'll read them again. I'll be like, oh yeah, I know this word. But then I never use it in conversation. I always just end up using my simple vocabulary that I've used forever.
Nothing wrong with that. We all do it.
I did learn a new word and then I started to use it. God, I can't remember what it was, but it was really useful. And now I use that word and I'm like, look how smart I am. So stupid, right? Oh, I also learned, I like the way I learned the correct pronunciation of demonstratable, like to demonstrate something, is demonstrable. And I f***ing love that. That's clearly demonstrable. I pronounced it correctly. Look at my big brain. Sorry, let's get back to it. She admired Gacy as a hardworking, charming man who was going places. Little did she know that a few weeks before their marriage, John had his first fully fledged sexual experience with a man. Richard Stewart was Gacy's co-worker and a closeted gay man. They went out drinking after work, admiring the local skirt and doing their best and failing to gain any interest from the local lasses. The two men continued to drink, getting fairly hammered, at which point Richard Stewart gave his sales pitch saying, you know, you go out looking for women, you strike out, and you probably go home and play with yourself. Me, I don't give a shit who blows me. A mouth is a mouth. So if I strike out with a woman, I pick up a guy, which means on any given night, I got twice the chance to score that you do. A clever play in that day and age. Little did Richard Stewart know that Gacy was bisexual. He didn't exactly need that much convincing or alcohol, but in the end, it was Richard Stewart who wound up blowing Gacy. However, when Gacy woke up the next morning lying next to Stewart, he felt violated, not because he had disliked the night's experiences, but because he felt it undermined his attempts at proving his father wrong. He'd worked hard professionally, but here he was, behaving like a quote-unquote queer. His father had won this round. Gacy also resented how Stewart had chatted him into the sexual encounter. Gacy felt outwitted, less of a man. As a result, Gacy vowed that if he ever dabbled in gay sex again, he would make sure that he, not the other man, had the upper hand. Suddenly, sex for Gacy became not just a matter of satisfaction or social validation, but also power and control. Somewhere, somehow, at this point in the script, I can hear Pogo the clown laughing. Yeah, it's super interesting how, this script is so in-depth and we're still in Gacy's background, but you can see how, because even if you are, I feel like everyone somewhat is familiar with John Wayne Gacy. Through the intro, we know that he killed a lot of people and he buried them in the basement. There's no spoilers there, but you can really see, just because we're going so far into depth, and I love it, how each of these little things points. I don't really know how he got into the clown makeup yet, but I'm sure that'll be explained as well. Just how all of these little threads from his past come together and point towards the psycho killer that he becomes. Fascinating. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. Simon, so far, it's been horrible. I'm loving the structure. I'm loving the threads coming together. I'm obviously not loving the content because I'm not a psycho. I don't feel I need to explain that, but just in case, someone will be like, Simon loved John Wayne Gacy's upbringing. No, Simon did not. The point of no return. There comes a point in every person's life where there is a line. No matter their past traumas, no matter what they have suffered, there is a line where a human being has to choose between remaining human or becoming a monster. Most people choose to retain their humanity. They back away from the brink. And there, lying just beyond the realm of human decency, lingering in the back of your mind, is the line. Wait, David, you're kind of saying there comes a point in every person's life where there is a line. I don't feel like most people have this. There's been no point in my life where it's like, oh man, I'm so close to becoming a supervillain. Or just a villain in general. I feel like that line would be really far off for me to become I'm not the most wonderful, selfless, glorious person who ever lived. I would say I'm not even I'm quite a selfish person. I work quite hard not to be such a selfish person because I'm kind of aware of that facet of me. I'm narcissistic and self-centered, and I try not to be. But still, that line of me becoming like a monster is really far away. I'd have to travel a really far direction to be like, oh wow, let's not become a monster. I don't think that's just me, David. Oh, David almost became a serial killer.
I've given it my best shot.
And there, lying just beyond the realm of human decency, lingering in the back of your mind, is the line. A set of actions so horrific, so repugnant to the human soul, that if you chose to cross it, you ultimately have to be responsible for your actions. Again, David, there becomes a point in every person's life where there is a line. David's laying the seeds of us thinking he's a psycho killer. No matter what sort of madness fills your head, no matter what sort of poison affects your soul, you just have to be. Because at a certain point, the story ceases to be about you, and it becomes about your victims. And with John Wayne Gacy, we're fast approaching that line. John Wayne Gacy's bride, Marilyn, came from a well-to-do family. Her father, Fred Myers, bought three franchise restaurants for Kentucky Fried Chicken in Waterloo, Iowa, 300 miles or 480 kilometers northwest of Springfield in Illinois. That'd be awesome. If my father-in-law owned 3 KFCs, you can eat. if you go in, right, you must have some special magical card that lets. I'd be so fat. I'd be so fat. It would be unbelievable. Oh my God. I want a KFC franchise. This would be amazing. I love KFC. Fred wished to set up his daughter with a good life. Myers hired Gacy to be the manager of those restaurants where Gacy insisted that his employees and colleagues refer to him by the nickname The Colonel. Legend. That's so weird though. Gacy also lied that he was an honorary colonel in the Illinois Governor's Brigade. Myers also brought Gacy and his daughter a new home in Iowa, and he paid Gacy $15,000 a year, or $138,000 in today's money, plus giving Gacy a 20% share in the profit from the 3 restaurants, which were considerable. Yeah, if her family's well-to-do, he's buying them a house, and then he's giving Gacy 20% of the 3 restaurants. Wait, did they get married? They were married, right? Bride. Yes, sorry, bride. Pay attention, Simon. This guy, Gacy has got it good, my dudes. Gacy also became a rising star with the Iowa Jaycees, where he soon sat on the board of directors and became the club chaplain. It seemed apparent to all and sundry that Gacy had politics in his future. Gacy himself planned to run for alderman in Waterloo, followed by running for mayor, then the Iowa Senate. Ultimately, Gacy saw himself taking a crack at running for president on the Democratic ticket. Imagine a President Gacy for a moment, if you will. This is... I mean... I think when I was younger, I was like, I can do anything. I will do this. I will do that. And then as you become an adult, you're like, you get things in check and you're like, okay, well, I might be quite good, but I'm not that good. Like, I'd have no illusions of, I mean, I don't, you check at some point you become realistic. But I do admire people. I do really admire people who are like, I will do that. And it's like, and then they get older and they're still like, I will do that. And I'm like, okay. I mean, at some point they don't, and it's like, well, yeah. But sometimes they do. And I bet everyone who becomes president, they're these people. They're like, they know from a young age. They're like, I could probably do this. And that's so intense. Have you guys seen that TV show? Oh, God, what's it called? I saw it like a year ago now. It's on Netflix. It's okay. It's about this young kid who is like in high school, and he's the school president or whatever, or he wants to be, and he's running for office. And then he's like, no, I'm just doing this because I'm going to be president. And he just goes around telling everyone, I'm going to be president someday. And you just like believe him. And you're like, yeah, he's going to be president. I think the storyline of this show is that this guy is going to become president, like however it happens. And you're just watching him and you're like, that's quite impressive, isn't it? Marilyn Gacy had 2 children. They would not be named. Their birth dates will not be specified. In 1967, Gacy and Marilyn were having dinner at the house of Charles Hill, the president of the local Waterloo Jaycees. As Marilyn and Hill's wife were in the kitchen, clearing up from dinner, Gacy turned to Hill and asked, "Do you like Marilyn's dress?" Hill replied that he did. Gacy pressed him, "Do you like her?" Hill replied platonically, "She's a good woman. I've always liked her." Gacy then leaned toward Hill and whispered conspiratorially, "Marilyn likes you too. Do you want to fuck her?" Hill was caught off guard. He stuttered, "John, Marilyn and I are just friends, you understand?" Gacy suddenly smiled and pushed back, laughing. He said that he was just joking around, but he was not. Unbeknownst to Charles Hill, Gacy had created a gang of wife swappers within the Jaycees. Evidently, Marilyn volunteered and enthusiastically took part in this arrangement. Also, Gacy and his fellow Jaycees circulated hardcore pornography amongst each other, the kind that was illegal in those days. They did hard drugs, and they ran a prostitution ring where Waterloo strippers would give the Jaycees a share of their profits from their after-work activities in exchange for access to wealthy local clients. Holy shit, what is going on in this? I was like, okay, so they're wife swapping. It's a bit, it's definitely alternative. It's not something you'd probably expect to be going on in this like local politics club in the 1960s or 70s or whatever. But what? And then they're swapping hardcore pornography. And it's like, okay, fine. Like, now we don't need to swap hardcore pornography because we can go onto the internet. Did hard drugs and ran a prostitution ring? Now we're getting like mega... Okay, so maybe they were doing cocaine or whatever. But, okay, so running the prostitution ring is the one that really gets me. That's like, that is fully illegal. You're pimping, basically. So we're just like going from like, okay, so they were like alternative, they were doing this, they were doing drugs, and they were also pimps. That feels like a major different step in terms of criminality. Right? Meanwhile, Gacy kept the cops at bay by staying on friendly terms with them, occasionally getting a prostitute to honeypot a cop at one of Gacy's sex parties so the cop wouldn't come asking questions about the wider operation, and more mundanely, by giving the cops free fried chicken. Well, fair enough, guys. If someone gave me free fried chicken, I'd be like, your secrets about your prostitution ring are safe with me. I'll have one more wing, please. Obviously not. I'm joking, although I do love fried chicken.
Honey, do you think KFC's still open?
In 1967, Gacy's father, John Sr., came to Iowa to visit his son. John Sr. kept relatively sober for once and treated his son with a certain degree of respect. He was genuinely impressed with how Gacy had secured a fabulous wage, a wife, and family, and was proving to be the big man on campus with the Jaycees. Not bad for a simpering panty waist. I don't know what a panty waist is. It's some old school insult, I guess. When it came time for John Sr. to leave, he proffered his hand, which Gacy shook. John Sr. looked his son in the eye and said, I was wrong about you. Here, without question, was the crowning moment of John Wayne Gacy's life. Everything was about to fall apart. In August 1967, John Wayne Gacy was driving to work when 15-year-old Donald Voorhees shouted out from the side of the road for Gacy to stop. The two knew each other. Voorhees had a father in the Jaycees who was actually a political rival of Gacy's. The adult man asked the kid what he was doing out by the side of the road. Voorhees explained that he had been at his girlfriend's house and was walking home. Gacy then abruptly asked the 15-year-old boy, "You been laid yet?" The young boy replied that he had, and then Voorhees asked whether it was true that Gacy had shown porn films at his parties. Gacy replied, "Yeah, we showed some films. I still got them over at my house. You're getting to an age where you can get a good educational experience out of watching something like that. Come on back to the house. I'll set up the projector and we'll watch a couple of them." Dude, no. No. What are you doing? Gacy drove the boy to his house and then led him down into the basement. He set up the projector and put on a porn film for the 15-year-old to watch. Gacy's wife, Marilyn, wouldn't be home that night. She was sleeping with another man. Gacy plied the child with alcohol. When the film was over, Gacy began peppering the boy with inappropriate questions, stuff about how often he had sex with his girlfriend or whether she'd ever gone down on him. Gacy then launched into a diatribe about how some men have sex with other men before they start having regular sex with a woman. Gacy then performed oral sex on Voorhees. When it came time for the boy to perform oral sex on Gacy, the older man assured him that, quote, "It tastes no different than sucking." Dude. No, I don't want to know. Voorhees returned to Gacy's home several more times, demanding money, and again, Gacy engaged in sexual acts with the minor. A line had been crossed, and Gacy had no intention of going back. Yeah, Gacy just... Has he done any crimes yet? No, he's been the victim of crimes. But now he is perpetuating it, and he has become a criminal himself. His activities widened and intensified for the rest of 1967, and in the early months of 1968, Gacy engaged in sex acts with several underage boys. Some victims Gacy paid. In another instance, Gacy arranged for the boy to have sex with his wife, Marilyn, and then Gacy blackmailed the boy into engaging in sexual acts with him as well. After numerous requests for increasing amounts of money, Donald Voorhees demanded $100 from Gacy, or $807 in today's money, so that he could buy an amplifier for his rock band. Gacy negotiated with the boy and gave him enough money to rent an amplifier instead. He then told Voorhees that he better not come round demanding any more money. When Voorhees threatened to tell people what was going on, Gacy replied that he would just deny everything, and quote, "Who do you think they're going to believe, asshole?" Yeah, I mean, I guess it's different these days. Is it? I don't know. But if a kid makes an accusation like that, the police are going to look into that. They're not just going to be like, "Oh, it's John. He's the alderman," or he's got a bright future in politics. They're going to be like, "All right, John, we know all of this. We're also going to make sure that you're not a pedo, okay?" In March 1968, Donald Voorhees informed his father that Gacy had been sexually assaulting him. The boy's father immediately went to the police. Well, okay, let's find out how this plays out then. The authorities launched an investigation into Gacy, brilliant, who denied the charges. It was his word against the boys. Gacy also alleged that Voorhees' father had manufactured the charges because he opposed Gacy's bid to become president of the Waterloo Jaycees. That is an absurd thing to say. Surely people didn't believe that. Eventually, police got a warrant and they found pornographic films in Gacy's house corroborating the boy's story. Yeah, I mean, there'd be ways to corroborate this. You'd be like, okay, well, describe Gacy's penis.
That could work.
Or tell us some distinguishing mark about him, something, right?
It's small, it's brown, it's made of leather, it has my initials on it. I believe that's it.
As the pressure mounted, Gacy demanded to take a polygraph test, which took place on May 2nd, 1968. For some reason, Gacy felt certain that he could beat the test. Instead, the test showed a spike in his heart rate when he was asked about sexually assaulting Voorhees. Nevertheless, Gacy continued to deny the charges. Why would you think you could... I mean, also, polygraphs, aren't the stats like 51% of the time they're accurate? So they're a percentage better than a guess? Which is crazy, and obviously we shouldn't listen to polygraph tests at all. Wasn't there a famous case in the UK where a guy ended up killing himself because it was a reality TV show, or like a daytime trashy. I don't want to say it was Jeremy Kyle, but it was one of these trashy daytime television shows. And they made this guy take a lie detector about him like cheating on his wife or something. And the lie detector was like, yeah, you cheated on your wife. And he was like, no, I didn't. And he killed himself or something. And it's crazy. And then the show got shut down, which is like good, because that was insane. And lie detectors are not accurate. I don't even know why they exist. It's just basically witchcraft. Another one of Gacy's victims came forward, Edward Lynch, who worked as a busboy at one of the Kentucky Fried Chickens that Gacy managed. That's the other thing, right? I forgot about that as well. If it's like one person comes forward, they'll be like, all right, it's your word against theirs. But if two people, this is like the whole Me Too thing. It's like, okay, it's like, well, one person came forward and accused someone of something. And it's like, okay, well, that's probably not, I don't know what it is. It's a very hard thing to comment on as a dude, or like as just I don't know, it's a hard thing to comment on because you don't want to take someone who's accusing someone of doing something horrible lightly. But then also if like many women come forward and are like, yeah, this dude is up to stuff, then it's like that obviously changes things. And then it's like, okay, yeah, forgot about that. That is an issue. Lynch claimed that at the end of August 1967, like Voorhees, he had been lured to Gacy's house where he had been shown pornographic films and where Gacy had attempted to talk Lynch into sex acts. At one point, Gacy threatened Lynch with a knife and backed him into a bedroom. A struggle ensued where Gacy cut the boy's arm, but Lynch managed to fight Gacy off. The older man got a band-aid for the cut, apologized, and managed to convince Lynch to stick around to watch another pornographic movie. Oh my god. Gacy then convinced Lynch to quote-unquote try something and allowed him to bind his arms behind his back with a chain and padlock. He reassured the boy that he wasn't going to hurt him. After you'd just cut him with a knife? I mean, Gacy, I know he's charming and stuff, but wow, you can talk anyone into anything. That's crazy. Lynch, only being 16 years old and in the face of the only boss he'd ever known. Oh yeah, also, okay, I forgot how young he was, and he also works for the dude. So I just gave Gacy credit for being able to talk anyone into anything when it's basically his boss telling him what to do. I take it back. I'm sorry. Yeah, he's just trying to keep his job, and he's 16. The power dynamic here is crazy. He permitted this to happen. When Gacy tried to initiate sex, Lynch headbutted him and demanded Gacy remove the chains. Ignoring him, Gacy left the room and came back wheeling a folding cot. Gacy then pushed the boy onto the cot and began to strangle him. Lynch partially lost consciousness, but he remembered as he was blacking out that Gacy relented and began rolling onto his side and freeing him of the chains. Gacy then apologized and Lynch demanded to leave. Gacy let him go. A few days after the incident, Gacy fired Lynch from his job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dude, I know he's the victim here. I don't want to take anything away from that. But yeah, you got to go to the police. You got to go to the police. Especially after he's fired you and he doesn't have any leverage over you anymore. Although you're 16, an adult can be scary. Like a person like that. That's even though like at 16 you're a lot smarter than you are as a kid because you're like almost an adult. But it's like still you're not mature enough to stand up to someone who's got years more experience than you and is a scary psycho predator. Oh my god, this is really uncomfortable. American Predator. On May the 10th, 1968, Gacy was arrested at his home for the crime of committing sodomy with a teenage boy and attempted sodomy with a second teenage boy. Oh wait, of course, I'm sorry, this guy did go to the police. Of course, this is the second guy who came forward. I take it all back. Follow the story, Simon. Come on. Gacy continued to protest his innocence and claimed that all of this had been cooked up by his political opponents. A staggering number of people believed Gacy, including Charles Hill, the outgoing Waterloo Jaycees president. Gacy was one of the most respected members of the community, and moreover, Gacy had deliberately fabricated a reputation of being something of a ladies' man, constantly telling his friends about how many women he'd slept with that week, it was still unsure whether the case would go to trial. Gacy was nominated as a candidate for the Waterloo president. He withdrew from the nomination, citing the current controversy. In the eyes of his supporters, Gacy was making a noble sacrifice for the greater good of the organization to spare a controversy. At the same time, people felt that the conspirators against Gacy had won, which only increased sympathies for Gacy. Only a couple of months later, in July 1968, the Jaycees defiantly awarded Gacy another one of the Key Man Awards. This was a guy looking down the barrel of charges for being a pedo. Such was the faith of Gacy's supporters that he had done nothing wrong. And not just being a pedo, but he basically kidnapped someone, he assaulted someone, he cut someone, and then he fired someone because, there's many crimes here. There are many crimes. Gacy tried and failed to beat a second polygraph test. What are you doing? You're like, I can beat a polygraph test. I'm excellent. Oh, it turns out I can't. I'll take another crack at that. It consistently showed that he was lying when he denied having sexual relations with Voorhees. People in the county prosecutor's office joked that, quote, the only thing Gacy got right was his name. It was at this point that Gacy got rattled and made the blunder of altering his story. He claimed that he picked up Voorhees and asked him about a rumor that he gave blowjobs for cash. According to Gacy, Voorhees said yes, claimed he was a regular prostitute, and that he charged $40. Gacy claimed he negotiated Voorhees down to $5. Gacy told police that he couldn't maintain an erection because he was super duper 100% straight. According to Gacy, Voorhees insisted on trying again another day, and it was at this point that Voorhees began harassing Gacy for sex and more money. Gacy claimed on 2 more occasions that he relented and paid for the service out of, quote, curiosity. Dude, so you're soliciting a male underage prostitute, and you're like, no, I don't want that. How does anyone still believe you, you idiot? Despite the fact that Gacy had just admitted to soliciting the sexual services of a minor, thank you, a number of Democrats in Iowa were still putting pressure on the county's prosecutor's office not to take the case to trial. Are you f***ing me? Here was a future presidential candidate, after all. A lot of them had been caught up in wife-swapping at Gacy's parties and had allegedly participated in the use of hard drugs and the running of prostitutes. What? So he's kind of got, but they're not all going to be in this pimp ring that they've set up. There's got to be someone who's not corrupt.
I'm going to show the people of Gotham their city doesn't belong to the criminals and the corrupt.
Good luck with that.
Or am I just being naive? God damn. The same went for a few of the local cops. There were concerns that Gacy could expose them should he be prosecuted. Even at this point, Gacy might have skated by without the issue ever going to trial. But Gacy was not aware that the county prosecutor was wavering about bringing him to trial, so Gacy took matters into his own hands. On the 30th of August 1968, Gacy burglarized a lumber store with 18-year-old high school student Russell Schroeder, pretty much for kicks and to win the kid over, and during the course of that evening, Gacy mentioned that he wanted Donald Voorhees intimidated from testifying. Dude, this is so intense. On August the 31st, Gacy promised to pay Schroeder $300 to intimidate Voorhees from providing witness testimony at trial. On September the 5th, 1968, Schroeder lured Voorhees to a park 5 miles outside of town, claiming that he had recently stolen 20 cases of liquor, which he wanted to share with him. There, Schroeder sprayed Voorhees in the face twice with a can of mace that Gacy had supplied, told him not to testify against Gacy, and then repeatedly kicked the boy in the ribs while he lay on the ground. Schroeder drove over to Gacy's to return the mace. Gacy did not pay him that night, nor would Schroeder ever collect. Voorhees immediately went to the police. On the 6th of September, the police arrested Schroeder for assault. After several days of interrogation and pressure from his parents to come clean, Schroeder admitted that he had been put up to it by Gacy. I am almost lost for words in the fact that all of this has gone on. Gacy has very quickly become a major criminal, and just because I know there's so many pages left in this story, and I know vaguely the story of John Wayne Gacy, I just can't believe that he's going to get away with the rest of the crimes that he gets away with in his life, given that he should be so hot on someone's radar and on a sexual predator watch list, and, just ideally in jail, and then on probation or whatever they call it, where they watch you super closely for the rest of his life. Surely. These are major crimes. Like witness intimidation and pedophilia? Kidnapping? Did he rape anyone yet? Statutory rape? I don't know how that works exactly, but because they're under 18. Okay, so it's rape. It's not. What's going on? Why is he not in prison? On the 9th of September, Gacy was arrested for witness intimidation. He was bailed for $1,000. On September the 12th, Gacy was arrested again for pointlessly burglarizing the lumber store, and bail was set at $10,000, 2/3 of a year's wages, an amount that Gacy could not raise. He remained in prison, and that same day, a judge ordered Gacy to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Meanwhile, under interrogation, Gacy began to do what his fellow JCs and allies in the Democratic Party had feared. He spilled the beans and he named people involved in wife swapping, hard drugs, and prostitution. And as Gacy languished behind bars, even more victims started to come out of the woodwork. 17-year-old Richard Westphal, another employee at Kentucky Fried Chicken, claimed that Marilyn Gacy had seduced him, and when John Wayne Gacy caught them in the act, he coerced Westphal into filleting him. Another boy claimed that Gacy got him drunk and held him at gunpoint, forcing him to play a game of Russian roulette. As in the game where you put a bullet in a gun and spin it around? Dude. Another boy... How is he not going to prison forever? Another boy claimed that Gacy was constantly getting boys drunk at his house where he kept a well-stocked bar. There the boys would play pool, with Gacy constantly badgering them to bet on pool games where the prize was oral sex. The most perverse part of the underage drinking club at Gacy's house was that the perpetrator charged the boys monthly dues for access to the club, as if it was a privilege to be preyed upon. I just there's crimes across the spectrum here. This is definitely a crime, like underage drinking and supplying alcohol to minors. Also, selling it is also, that's probably another crime. There's crimes from all levels here. Why? How are you not in prison? I mean, you're in jail, but how are you not going to end up in prison for ages? Another unnamed boy claims that Gacy had told him he was a sex researcher. Dude. Acting under orders of Iowa's governor to explore the bounds of homosexuality and sex with teenagers. Okay. Really? Gacy met with the child on several occasions, got him good and drunk, and then sexually assaulted him in several ways during these so-called experiments. Allegedly, Gacy used the same lie with multiple boys. And bear in mind that all of this happened in just a few months between August 1967 and March 1968. On November the 2nd, Gacy was transferred from prison to a mental institution to be evaluated over the course of the next 17 days. He complained about the lack of cleanliness in the place, but he also charmed the nurses, whom Gacy believed came to actually like him. In reality, they were creeped out by him and considered Gacy something of a slimy con artist and a bully. Gacy told doctors of his fainting spells as a child, claiming to have a heart condition. Upon physical examination, the doctors could find no evidence of a heart defect and no signs of heart disease. Whatever had caused Gacy's fainting spells as a youth, along with his violent fits, it had not been his heart. John Sr., had he been told, would have likely smiled triumphantly at the news. Conversely, the doctors found that aside from being fat, Gacy was in fairly good health. Whatever was going on with him, it was clearly psychological. When Gacy was evaluated by psychiatrists, he ran his mouth as usual. His testimony was wildly inconsistent with the testimonies of all his victims. Dr. Eugene Gowron wrote, John Gacy prided himself on being a good talker. There was an element of control in his garrulousness. Another new word for me. Look up. I don't know if this is useful. This is a... I don't know these words. Maybe people like Simon, of course we know the word garrulousness. We don't need you to define that. Would you define another simple word? Excessively talkative, especially on trivial matters. There you go. Learning new words all the time that I will never use. It was apparent that, the quote continues, it was apparent that John would twist the truth in such a way that he would not be made to look bad. My general impression was that he was a smooth talker and an obscurer who was trying to whitewash himself from all the wrongdoing. Gowron found that Gacy had an IQ of 118. Gowron also determined that Gacy had a high level of social intelligence. Neurologically, Gowron found nothing wrong with him, no brain damage, yet Gowron wrote, he had a total denial of responsibility for anything that has happened to him. He could produce an alibi for everything. Everything points to a diagnosis of sociopathic personality disturbance and an antisocial reaction. This amounted to diagnosing Gacy with either sociopathy or psychopathy. For those of you tuning into the Casual Criminalist for the first time, this denotes an utter lack of empathy and conscience. We get quite a few of those around these parts. Gacy's psychological examination concluded that he was fit to stand trial, but added that his mental pathologies were unlikely to benefit from known medical treatments, both of which were accurate. However, the psychiatrists fell short in other aspects of their analysis. They had bought the story that Gacy had been harassed by Voorhees, who had allegedly been acting as a male prostitute, and that Gacy had purchased the boy's sexual services out of curiosity. The psychiatrists, bleeding hearts that they were, also recommended that Gacy shouldn't get jail time, but be let off on probation. Not okay. What are you up to, psychiatrists? How?
You screw up and those boys get fried.
He's soliciting sex. It doesn't matter if the kid's a prostitute. He's a kid. What are you talking about? That's insane. Things looked even better for Gacy. He struck a plea bargain where he admitted to sodomy in exchange for the charges of burglary and witness intimidation being dropped. But the prosecutors pushed the judge for the maximum sentence for sodomy. In the end, on December the 3rd, Gacy was given 10 years imprisonment at Iowa State Reformatory in Anamosa. Gacy, who had been sure he would skate free, was furious. On the same day, his wife Marilyn, who had allegedly been complicit in his predations on young boys, filed for divorce and custody of the children. Gacy never saw any of them again. Well, there's a couple of insane things here. One, he went to prison. The most insane thing is he went to prison for sodomy for 10 years, which is like, what the And also, he didn't go to prison for all of the actual crimes that he committed, like preying on children. What is going on, 1960s? This is super Pogo's adventures in prison. While imprisoned at Anamosa, John Wayne Gacy stuck to doing what he knew best. He became a society man. He quickly rose to become head cook in the prison mess hall and secured higher wages for the other inmates who worked there. He went around the prison as a convict turned handyman and fixed things up so conditions were generally better for the inmates. He converted increasing numbers of inmates over to the JCs, from 50 to 230 members in the prison population, now devoted to liberty, entrepreneurship, and the American way. Oh god, he's getting released from prison early, isn't he? Because he's basically a model prisoner. Gacy was always busy with some damn project. The guy never seemed to sleep. In the spring and summer of 1969, Gacy even built a mini golf course within the prison with the assistance of his JC compatriots, and Gacy himself put 370 hours into the project. The story even hit the newspapers. Gacy was regarded by the prison warden as a model inmate. Gacy was thus given special privileges. He didn't have to wear prison denims like the rest of the inmates. He wore a white business shirt. The guards snuck in cigars for Gacy. Somehow he got his hands on a black business briefcase, which he always carried around, though God knows what he really needed it for. This is part of his weird image, isn't it? It's just like, obviously he's a narcissist, and he's just continuing that somehow. It's a bit weird. However, I also totally get like this sort of thing in prison. It's like, if you're in prison, what the else are you going to do? And they were like, you could build a golf course. I'd be like, cool. Because otherwise I'm just going to sit around. Like, I would desperately want things to do. I'd be like, yeah, cook, sure. Golf course, sure. Fixing things, sure. Carry a briefcase, whatever. Just be like, hell yeah, just get into something. Otherwise you're going to be there for 10 years. And it's going to feel like, I mean, it'll probably feel like forever anyway. But, you know, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, okay. This sounds good. And he's got this JC's thing going on. Why am I saying he's good? He's King John Wayne Gacy. He should be in solitary confinement for the rest of his life. You'd think that the prisoners would immediately despise a guy like Gacy. Yeah, you would. But also, I know what's going to happen. I know what David's going to say. I'm going to guess. But it's like, okay, so this guy's basically a predator, and he's in prison for sodomy. So the inmates are going to assume he's a homosexual, which I'm imagining in prison. I don't know how prison works, but that's probably in 1960s. That's not going to be a good time. However, he is incredibly charming, apparently, as we've discovered throughout this whole thing, and that he can talk people into whatever, and that he's good at making people like him. And I think that's going to work for him to the extent that he's going to be okay. So a child predator who swanned around the place, dressed like a businessman, kissing the warden's ass and chumming about with the guards, who would usually have the shit beat out of him, or worse. Yeah, but he's chummy with the guards, and he's getting raises for everyone who works in the kitchen. He's chummy with the guards, and he's getting them a golf course. He's chummy with the guards, and he's, you know, it's not just to his own benefit, it's because it helps other people, and they will like that.
It's okay.
And also, they don't know he's in prison for being a child predator. He's not in prison for being a child predator. He's in prison for sodomy. But I don't know if they'd find out somehow. Yet Gacy spun some lies in order to earn himself some respect. He told the other inmates he was a prominent politician who had been framed by his enemies for showing porn movies to 17-year-old girls. Girls, not boys, who were nearly of adult age, which in the eyes of the inmates softened the charges of being a kiddie fiddler. Okay, but wait, they don't know what he's actually in prison for? Plus, he was framed. Gacy also told the inmates that his ex-wife was the daughter of Colonel Sanders, the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken, rather than the daughter of some rich dude who had bought 3 of the restaurants. Gacy also told the lie that he had once served faithfully as a U.S. Marine, a falsehood he also circulated in his Waterloo days with the Jaycees. Wait, isn't this the sort of thing that you're like, I was in the Marines, and then someone was, and I don't know, it happens in like all those movies where it's like, oh yeah, what branch? I was in the Marines. And then you're like, and then that guy beats the out of you because he was in the Marines and you weren't. And you're lying about it. While this story was not enough to win over the more hardened criminals at Anamosa, it was enough to win over the non-violent offenders and first-timers. Gacy also told his new friends that he had recently developed a heart condition and that if he engaged in the slightest bit of violence, it would probably kill him. This prompted a lot of the men to keep Gacy out of conflicts and warded off more of the violent men who would have liked to take a pop at Gacy but didn't want to make it a murder charge for simply punching a guy in the face. On the subject of sex in prison, this is a perplexing topic regarding Gacy, whom you'd think would be having the time of his life. No, not appropriate, David. Especially given the major predatory sex drive that landed him there. We don't have any admissions on Gacy's part, and in order to maintain an air of respectability amid the overwhelmingly straight prison population, Gacy expressed more disdain and hatred for homosexuality than many of the other prisoners. So if Gacy was having sex at this time, he was doing it very, very surreptitiously. On the other hand, Gacy had preferred underage boys, so it's possible that Gacy avoided having sexual relations while in prison in order to avoid the risk of becoming the bottom. As we've seen ever since his night with Richard Stewart, Gacy's entire approach to sex was about power and control, something the overweight, relatively weak Gacy may have been forced to surrender to another, stronger male inmate. In June 1969, after serving just 7 months of a 10-year sentence. Okay, good. I read the next line. Gacy's application for parole was denied. Why are you allowed to apply for parole after... You imagine going to prison for a decade and after 7 months you're like, you want to apply for parole or not? Be like, it's been 7 months. Why would you even try? But I get the feeling that even though this is denied, it's an indicator that he's going to get out of prison pretty early. On June the 28th, 1969, the Iowa Supreme Court rejected Gacy's appeal against his sentencing after studying behind bars in November of 1969 at the age of 27. So that's only a few months later. Gacy finally got his high school diploma. If he was going to be stuck in prison for a few years, Gacy was determined to keep busy. Yeah, okay. That's what I'm saying. It makes perfect sense. Outside of Alamosa's walls, hundreds of miles away in Chicago, Illinois, on December the 25th, John Gacy Sr. dropped dead from cirrhosis of the liver. He had lived just long enough to see his worst fears about his son realized, that he was homosexual in the worst possible way. His son was also a homosexual who preyed on underage teens. Allegedly, John Sr. cried when his son was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sodomy. I can't confirm this, yet it seems more likely, given his history, that John Sr. was more crying out of shame and frustration than a deeply buried love that he felt for his son. Oh yeah, I don't think he cried because his son went to prison. I think he cried because he's so wildly disappointed in his son. I don't have any comments there, other than these are both two really terrible people. When John Wayne Gacy got the news, he fell to the floor sobbing. In later years, John would assert that his quote-unquote innocent curiosity about young gay boys had killed his father. While in prison, John commissioned a man who had murdered someone in a bar fight to paint his father's portrait. In May 1970, isn't Gacy famous for being in prison later and painting weird portraits of clowns? Is that a Gacy thing? I feel it is. It's like all these little threads will come together, won't they? In May 1970, Gacy applied again for parole. His good behavior whilst incarcerated spoke for itself. He was released on June the 18th, 1970 with 12 months probation after serving just a year and a half of a 10-year sentence for what amounted to the repeated statutory rape of an underage boy and the assault and attempted rape of another boy. And kidnapping and solicitation. Wait, did we have that? That was there? Yeah. Oh my God. There were so many crimes. Drinking with, selling booze to underage minors, buying booze, drinking, all of the weird shit he did. There were many crimes. Year and a half. What is going on?
He was white.
Along with a number of other likely acts of sexual assault and predation on teenage boys that never made it to trial. Yes. When Gacy was released from prison, his old friend Charles Hill, former president of the Waterloo Jaycees, picked him up and took him to dinner with his wife. In Hill's eyes, Gacy was innocent and had been raped over the coals for political reasons. Hill said to Gacy, John, now that it's over, keep your nose clean. Surely your political career is over. You went to prison for sodomy. Then your political career is not going to be over because obviously that stopped being a crime and people don't know what else he went to prison for. He didn't go to prison for other stuff. This is crazy. People still think he's got a political career ahead of him, even though we know he did all this horrible stuff. Gacy stared at his friend for a moment and then replied, "I'll never go back to jail." Hill nodded and smiled, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Little did Hill know that what Gacy meant was that he planned to never let another victim like Donald Voorhees live to tell the tale. The Murder House. Despite claiming to his supporters in Waterloo, Iowa, that he intended to remain in the town to fight to re-establish his reputation, Gacy immediately relocated back to Chicago, Illinois, feeling that it would be easier to ply his trade with a clean slate. Charles Hill, Gacy thought traitorously, could go f*** himself. Chicago is a big city in another state, and it was where he grew up. Most people had little awareness of what had befallen Gacy back in Iowa. He moved back in with his now widowed mother, Marion, and got a job as a short order cook at a local dive bar, Bruno's Restaurant and Lounge. This is a fall. This is a fall from having those 3 KFCs and making a ton of money and 20% of the profits and being married and kids, and now you're living with your mother and working as a short order cook, which isn't, not bagging on that. It's just, it's a distance, isn't it? On February the 12th, 1971, 8 months after John Wayne Gacy was released from prison, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a teenage boy. Gacy had picked him up from the Greyhound bus terminal, Simon's favorite mode of transportation. Yeah, I made a video on one of my other channels, which was basically talking about the craziest stuff that's happened on Greyhound buses, and I mentioned that I had once taken a Greyhound bus all the way across the United States, just for fun. And it was an experience that I don't want to repeat. The charges were eventually dropped because the victim failed to show up in court in order to testify. I do not know if the boy was murdered or moved on. Gacy, meanwhile, lied to his friends and associates that the charge was for beating up a homosexual who made a pass at him. The Iowa Parole Board never got wind of the incident thanks to Gacy's old Democratic Party friends in Iowa, and he faced no consequences for violating its probation. John Wayne Gacy disliked his cooking job and sought to go into business for himself. So in June 1971, he started PDM Contractors, standing for Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. Initially a one-man company, Gacy got his start doing odd jobs on his days off from the dive bar. One of Gacy's first gigs was to paint the apartment of one of his fellow fry cooks. While he was working at the apartment, the cook's roommate came home. No sooner had the roommate said, "Hello, and who are you?" than the roommate declared that he was gay. A few days later, this same roommate showed Gacy a picture of himself in drag and asked if he could give Gacy oral sex. Gacy accepted. Afterwards, the two got talking. The cook's roommate told Gacy about how, at the corner of Clark and Broadway, you could pick up young male prostitutes for sex. The following month, in July 1971, Gacy was trawling the corner of Clark and Broadway when he encountered a young man named Mikael Reed. The two had sex and talked about Gacy's construction business. Reed was in need of a job, and Gacy agreed to make use of him at PDM Contractors. On August the 15th, 1971, John Wayne Gacy and his mother Marion moved into 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. Is that the one from the introduction? I think so. A 1950s home with multiple bedrooms and a large crawl space for quote-unquote storage. Gacy agreed to co-own the house with his mother, to whom he made monthly payments. Mikael Reed helped Gacy and his mother move in and took one of the spare bedrooms. Another man from the dive bar Gacy had worked at took another room. Gacy's Aunt Florence also moved in for 3 months. All 3 of the tenants paid rent, and financially, this seemed to be a pretty good move. Occasionally, Gacy and Reed would have sex, but not on a regular or passionate basis. It was more of a way for Gacy to scratch an itch. For Gacy, something was obviously missing from these encounters. Reed and Gacy would go out on jobs together for PDM Contractors. They argued occasionally, mostly about money, but it was not like they had a tempestuous relationship. Once, without any hint of an argument between the two men, Gacy came at Reed with a tire iron while the younger man's back was turned, but stopped short of hitting him when Reed turned around and caught him. Oh my god. Dude, you came this close to being murdered, my guy.
Then why does he stay?
On another occasion, Reed and Gacy were in the garage at 8213 Somerdale, and out of nowhere, Gacy hit Reed in the head with a hammer. Gacy was going to hit Reed again when the younger man grabbed Gacy's arm and asked him what the hell he was doing. Again, Gacy relented and patched up the wound on Reed's head. The next day, Reed moved out. Good move. Like, you're not moving out when you see the guy coming at you with a tire iron? Jesus. In retrospect, there's very little doubt that Gacy would have murdered him if he had stayed. Meanwhile, yeah, but has Gacy killed anyone yet? No. At least not that we've told, and I feel like this is the exposed narrative. It's not like we're keeping anything. Okay, so yeah, he's about to increase his level of crime again. Meanwhile, Gacy rekindled a relationship with Carol Lofgren, a woman he had briefly dated in high school. In 1971, Carol had gone through a divorce and had 2 daughters whose birth dates won't be revealed and who will remain unnamed. Carol had been experiencing trouble making ends meet, so rekindling things with Gacy seems like finding water in the desert. According to Carol, he swept me off my feet. I don't think I loved him, but he treated me well. He told me he had time in Iowa for showing pornography to younger boys. He told me he was bisexual. At first, I didn't understand what bisexual was. I took it as a joke. I really didn't believe it. It was the 1970s, after all. On December the 25th, 1971, the second anniversary of his father's death, Gacy had some sort of nervous breakdown beside John Sr.'s grave. He began sobbing uncontrollably, something for which it was very unusual for him. He was utterly wailing. He was brought home, but he was unable to stop weeping for hours. At the time, Gacy was fairly incomprehensible, but according to Carol, he was upset that he wasn't able to attend his father's funeral 2 years ago because he was in prison. Although the details of the Christmas Day breakdown are sketchy at best, many analysts attach some significance to this event, hazarding a guess that something finally broke in Gacy's mind at this time. This was because only a week later, Gacy would brutally murder a teenage boy. I don't know. I mean, I guess, okay, so he's breaking down, but also he attempted murder on the other dude twice. So what's the difference? I mean, what's the difference between attempted murder and murder? The only difference is in this case, he got stopped in the first time. So I think he was already a murderer. He was already on the path to be a murderer. Maybe, yeah, no, he's already there. Okay. The Greyhound busboy. On New Year's Eve, 1971, Gacy had to work at the dive bar, but Carol had her mother watch her daughters so she could show up to Bruno's in order for Gacy and Carol to ring in the new year together. They got back to 8213 Summerdale at 3 a.m. on the 1st of January, 1972, slept for 5 hours, and then Gacy drove Carol back to her own house. Gacy informed Carol that his Aunt Pearl had just died and he wouldn't be able to see her for a few days, and then drove off. That afternoon, he picked up his mother, Marion, and drove to a relative's house. There, Gacy threw a big New Year's Day party, and Gacy got stinking drunk. His mother refused to drive home with him and stayed the night. Gacy, yeah, smart move. Unlike 1970s, it's like, yeah, I'm super drunk, I'll just drive home. So what are you up to? Don't do that. Gacy, meanwhile, took off at 12:30 a.m. on January the 2nd, hammered, but he insisted on driving anyway. Apparently at random, John decided to drive to the Civic Center in downtown Chicago to look at the ice sculptures. Then maybe he'd pick up a young gay man from the nearby Greyhound bus station, take him home, and have sex with him. Gacy duly admired the ice sculptures. Then at 1:30 a.m., he picked himself up a 16-year-old boy from the Greyhound bus station who was hanging out there in the freezing cold in the middle of the night with a group of other young boys, possibly waiting for the next bus connections the following morning, possibly for the express purpose of prostitution. From this point forward, there were no independent witnesses, and we're entirely dependent on Gacy's later version of events. This account is almost certainly full of inaccuracies. And of course, by inaccuracies, I mean goddamn Caspit soak snake sucking lies. Police didn't even know the name of the Greyhound busboy until Gacy identified him as Timothy McCoy, who was from Michigan, traveling on his way to Nebraska. This was later confirmed via missing persons reports and forensics. According to Gacy, he picked up Timothy, and they drove around Chicago so that Gacy could show him all of the sights. All the while, John peppered him with questions about sex. Gacy claims that McCoy was getting hungry, so they drove back to 8213 Summerdale, where nobody else was staying that night, and Gacy fixed the boy a sandwich. He cut the meat for the sandwich with a big butcher knife. Along with food, Gacy plied the kid with beer and shots of Everclear, 95% alcohol. John has a real thing for that Everclear, which I don't think is even a drink. Isn't it like a cleaning fluid or something? Or like a disinfectant? The two discussed sex quite a lot, apparently including mutual fellatio. But according to Gacy, nothing happened between them. Given his future MO, however, it's almost certain that sometime during the course of this conversation, Gacy attempted to rape Timothy McCoy. Yet, according to Gacy, he offered McCoy a bed to sleep in, and with that, Gacy staggered off to his own bedroom. Then around 4 a.m., Gacy claims he awoke. Timothy McCoy was allegedly standing in the doorway of Gacy's bedroom with a butcher knife in his hand. According to Gacy, Timothy was stealthily making his way toward the bed in order to murder him. You can really tell that we've now flipped into Gacy's perspective, can't you? Because it's suddenly like Gacy's not the horrible bad guy, as reported by literally everybody who is a witness and not Gacy. And now it's like, no, they were trying to kill me. No one believes you. I don't believe you. Gacy leapt from the bed and grappled with McCoy in an effort to defend himself. In the ensuing struggle, Gacy claims he sustained a rather nasty cut on the arm. As they fought, Gacy claims that he asked McCoy, "Why are you doing this?" Indeed, there seems to be no clear reason why Timothy would attack Gacy, probably because this entire story is bull. What followed was conveniently unclear in Gacy's own memory. Evidently, Gacy's bulk forced Timothy to the ground, and Gacy managed to turn the blade against the boy. From there, the account is probably true. Gacy proceeded to stab Timothy McCoy 5 times in the chest. Gacy attests that Timothy choked on his own blood for a good long while, and then the 16-year-old died. What is more likely to have happened is that after picking Timothy up from the Greyhound bus station at 1:30 a.m., they drove around Chicago while Gacy spun his usual yarns, leading into sex talk. We do not know if the boy was receptive, straight, or gay, and we don't really know whether he was working as a prostitute or whether he was merely on his way to Nebraska. And the idea that Gacy went to sleep only to wake up at 4 a.m. doesn't add up. Driving around Chicago, plus food and drinks at Gacy's house, would have taken time. It was also a fairly long drive from downtown Chicago to West Somerdale, and Gacy usually made sure his victims were good and drunk before he jumped them, which again would have taken time. And Gacy liked to run his mouth. Thus, it's likely that the rape or attempted rape happened at around 4 a.m. without either of them going to sleep. It is then likely that the 16-year-old put up a fight against the flabby, relatively weak 30-year-old Gacy, and so in the course of the struggle, Gacy turned the knife on the boy, having his own arm cut. That detail seems unlikely to have just been fabricated, given his sister Joanne later testified to the wounds, but rather it inspired the whole attempted murder story. Then Gacy finally managed to overpower the inebriated and terrified victim, stabbing him to death. Yeah, and so at this point, we have the story which we made up, and we have the story that Gacy made up. And even though Gacy was there, it's like, whose story do you believe? From there, by Gacy's own account, he washed the blood off the knife and put it back in the kitchen. Then Gacy walked to the bedroom and washed the blood off his hands, face, and clothes while he listened to Timothy McCoy suffocate on his own blood. Jesus. By the time Gacy returned, Timothy was dead. Gacy dragged the corpse over to the trapdoor leading to the crawl space. He opened the door and simply rolled the body in. According to Gacy, he could not bear to enter the crawl space or bury the body at the time. He did that at a later date. Closing the trapdoor, Gacy cleaned as best he could the blood that had spilled out from the murder. The next day, after checking studiously for any further signs of bloodstains in the house that his mother might notice upon her return, Gacy rested easy. To quote Gacy himself, "It was just a nicely kept secret. Nobody knew about it." Bodies under the house. John Wayne Gacy married Carol Lofgren on the 1st of July, 1972. 9 days before the wedding, Gacy was arrested for sexual battery. Gacy had impersonated a police officer to force a teenage boy into his car, where he forced the boy to perform oral sex on him. When Gacy stopped at some traffic lights, the boy jumped out and ran away. Gacy tried to run the boy over with his car. The charges, however, were dropped. What?
I don't understand.
Evidently, the victim made the mistake of trying to blackmail Gacy for money following the crime, which caused the police to drop the case. Are you me? Okay. So he basically kidnapped someone, forced them to have sex with him, and then attempted to murder them. And then afterwards, the kid tries to blackmail Gacy, and the police are like, well, because you tried to blackmail him, we're just going to let him go. That doesn't make any... That means they're both guilty of a crime. It doesn't make Gacy any less guilty of a crime. Police, do you understand how this works? Apparently not. Gacy convinced his wife, Carol, that the kid had simply attempted to rob him and he was lying about the sex stuff. Carol moved into 8213 Somerdale, and Gacy's mother, Marion, moved into an apartment to give the newlyweds some space. Carol's 2 daughters immediately took to calling Gacy Daddy. Throughout July and August 1972, Carol complained about a rotting smell coming from the crawl space, which was worsened by the summer heat. Oh my god. Gacy claimed there was probably a broken sewer pipe. Gacy eventually put down a layer of concrete on top of where he'd buried Timothy McCoy's body, and the smell subsided. Nevertheless, Carol claims that as long as she lived there, every now and then she got a whiff of the faint, sweet, putrid smell of rotting flesh. Good lord. A tip for criminals. The smell is everything. Exert all your chemical research on that issue. Dispose when possible. Beyond that, it is unlikely any landlord will come looking for bodies that you have in your place. Oh my god. There's no tips for criminals.
I'm scared we went too far.
In 1973, Gacy quit working at the dive bar to focus on PDM contractors full-time. Gacy told Carol that the burden of his work made him too exhausted to have sex. Carol found gay porn under the sink and found a pair of semen-stained men's silk panties, which did belong to Gacy, in their bed. The couple began to argue, and Gacy occasionally got violent with Carol. Gacy increasingly spent more time sleeping on the couch. He would frequently go out in the middle of the night for quote-unquote business meetings. Also, in 1973, one of Gacy's teenage employees came to the house and beat Gacy up. Carol was told by Gacy that the employee was angry about money, when in actual fact, Gacy had attempted to rape him previously. A few months later, Carol accused Gacy of having an affair with a woman. Gacy denied this, and so Carol said, "Well, you're having affairs with boys then." Gacy denied this as well. Carol would continue to accuse Gacy of having affairs for the rest of their marriage, which I hope was short. Gacy claims that he murdered another teenage boy in January 1974. We don't know who this boy was. Gacy said he put the body in a closet before burying the victim under the house. According to Gacy, fluids leaking from the body stained Gacy's carpet, and this apparently caused Gacy some distress. There's a bloody dead body staining my carpet. All right, Gacy. What's wrong with you? On Mother's Day 1975, Carol and Gacy were in bed together. At this point, Gacy told his wife, "This is the last time we'll have sex." He said he was just too exhausted from work to have a sex drive anymore. Carol felt confused and humiliated. The truth was, in May 1975, Gacy had met Tony Antonucci, a 15-year-old, and he had grown infatuated. Gacy hired Tony to work for PDM contractors. Several times, Gacy tried to pressure Tony into sex, which the boy resisted. Each time, Gacy said that he was either joking or, quote, testing the boy's morals. In late 1975, Gacy showed up at Tony's house while his parents were out. He showed Tony several porn films, after which Gacy grabbed him and placed some handcuffs on him. Gacy left the boy on the floor and went into the kitchen to find a weapon. While Gacy was out of the room, Tony managed to wriggle loose of the cuffs. When Gacy returned, Tony tackled him to the ground. Tony then turned the tables and handcuffed Gacy. It was at this point that Gacy asked for mercy and promised to leave. Don't do it, man. Tony uncuffed him and the older man left. Tony, my dude, come on. Come on, he's done so many crimes. How does he keep getting away with it? Tony uncuffed him and the older man left. It's now clear that if Tony had not managed to wriggle loose of his restraints, that Gacy would have raped and murdered him. John Butkovich wasn't as lucky. Butkovich was 17 years old, a high school dropout, and worked for PDM contractors. He proved a hard worker and a kind young man, occasionally coming over to the Gacy household for dinner, where he played gleefully with Carol's two daughters. On July the 30th, 1975, just a week after Gacy's attack on Tony Antonucci, Butkovich came over to Gacy's house with a couple of friends to threaten the older man. Butkovich had done some work for Gacy, who was disputing how much money he owed the boy. Carol and her daughters were in Arkansas visiting relatives, so Gacy was alone that night. Gacy immediately offered the young man some drinks and struck a compromise with Butkovich about the money, and Gacy promised to pay the boy soon. The group drank more and smoked some pot together. After getting thoroughly wasted, the boys left. The next night, July the 31st, Gacy was drunk again, and he was cruising around Chicago in his car. He spotted Butkovich on the street. The boy was also drunk, having been at a party. Gacy waved for him to get in the car. The two argued again about Butkovich's paycheck. Gacy suggested they go back to 8213 Summerdale, have a drink, and discuss things. The two get back to Gacy's house. Carol was still out of town. According to Gacy, Butkovich was pushed over the edge by having one more beer and became absolutely wasted. At that point, Gacy convinced Butkovich to try on a pair of handcuffs, claiming he wanted to, quote, show him something cool. Gacy then pushed the boy onto the floor. Gacy claims he lay beside the boy for a while as Butkovich struggled against the restraints. Then, at around 3 a.m., Gacy straddled the boy's chest and used a rope to strangle Butkovich to death. Gacy has denied raping Butkovich, but take that claim for what it's worth. Leaving the boy's body where it lay in the living room, a drunken Gacy got up and he went to bed. The next morning, Gacy rolled up Butkovich's body in a plastic tarp and stored the body in the garage. He initially intended to bury Butkovich in the crawl space, but Carol and her daughters arrived home before he had the chance to move the body from the garage. Now Gacy was in a quandary. He could not move Butkovich's body out of the garage without being spotted by his wife. Instead, Gacy buried Butkovich under the concrete floor of his garage. Carol and the kids weren't permitted to go in there while Gacy was working. The entire job took 2 days of work. Gacy excavated a hole where he was originally going to place a drain tile, placed Butkovich in the hole, and poured fresh concrete over the top of the body, sealing him inside. It's very... I can't believe that was the easiest way. It's pretty intense. Can't you just wait for people to go out to like the supermarket or something? Not that I'm... No tips for criminals, but what are you doing?
I don't know what I'm doing.
Also, is storing the bodies in your house really the best idea in general? When Butkovich's car was found by his father Marco and it contained his keys, jacket and wallet, when Marco reported Butkovich's disappearance to the police, he was told that the boy had likely run away. Police, come on. All of his stuff. Who runs away without their wallet? Who runs away without their car even? Who runs away without all of these useful things? Without a jacket? What are you doing? It's Chicago. It's up north. It gets cold, right? And legally, the police told him a 17-year-old was free to leave home if they wanted to. Is that true? They're still a kid, right? Don't you get to say what your children do until they're 18, allegedly? When Marco phoned, allegedly because teenagers. Oh God, I'm not looking forward to this. I got another decade though. A little more than a decade. When Marco, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun. When Marco phoned Gacy, trying to track down his son, Gacy denied all knowledge of Butkovich's disappearance and offered to help him in any way he could. Shortly after murdering Butkovich, Gacy was appointed Secretary-Treasurer of the Norwood Park Street Lighting Committee. I love how he's just like, he lives these two lives, doesn't he? It's crazy. It was a thankless pen-pushing job and mostly just involved balancing the books and dealing with complaints about streetlights. This sounds like ultimate bureaucratic job. But it was Gacy's first foray back into politics. Gacy also volunteered PDM contractors to clean the local headquarters of the Democratic Party for free. Later that year, Gacy was named director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day Parade, and as a result became well-known and respected amid Chicago's Polish population. Gacy, the politician, was back in action. It was clear Gacy wanted to pick up where he left off before his arrest for sodomy back in Waterloo. I don't know how it was in the past, but nowadays, when people run for office, don't their opponents go through absolutely every detail of their life to find something to ruin their campaign? Or if they don't find anything, they'll make it up. This seems like, at some point, if you do get further in your political career, people are going to really look super hard into your past. If you end up running for, president, they're going to dig through all of your dirty laundry. And look, John Wayne Gacy, there's a lot of it. So is this really the best idea? Maybe you should just lay low. Or don't be a horrible criminal. Either one. At the end of 1975, Gacy joined the Moose Lodge, a local fraternal club which people used for socializing and networking. It's there that Gacy volunteered to entertain the children of the other Moose Club members by acting as Pogo the Clown. You shouldn't be around children. You should be on some sort of list or register to keep you away from children, all children, forever. Or maybe just put you in jail forever. So you're kept away from, anyone who's not a criminal. Or just in solitary confinement so you're kept away from everyone. Forever. Or, where's Chicago, Illinois? Do they have the death penalty there? Who knows? Maybe. It's the 1970s. Yeehaw. Although I know Gacy doesn't get executed because I'm pretty sure, now that I think about it more, he's doing those paintings in prison, which is weird, of creepy clowns, right? That is Gacy. It's Gacy. Weirdo. Is he still alive? I hope not. Sicko. Gacy made the costume himself. That's not creepy at all. He kept fairly busy as Pogo the Clown, doing the Easter, Christmas and Halloween parties of the club, picnics for the Democratic Party, along with visiting sick kids in hospital and taking part as Pogo in about a dozen parades a summer. Gacy provided all of these services free of charge. Gacy later said, "Pogo is a way of running away from myself. I enjoyed making people happy. I loved the laughing faces, especially the children. It was like regressing into childhood, becoming someone else, a whole different person." And as a clown, he was permitted to say and do things that he wouldn't have done as John Wayne Gacy. Gacy recalled walking into the crowd at a parade and groping a woman's breasts, making a Hong Kong noise as he did so. The crowd, including the assaulted woman, just laughed and did not bat an eye. Okay. It's weird, dude. There was one story that Gacy told about being Pogo the Clown that stands out to me. Pogo was working at a birthday party and was handing out candy to the kids. One child with already bulging pockets came up to the clown and lied that he hadn't been given any candy. Pogo leaned down and pinched the kid's cheek, which is usually an affectionate gesture, albeit one that is less commonly seen nowadays. But Pogo deliberately applied so much pressure to the child's cheek that it was actually painful. Pogo then hissed at the child, "Get your ass away from me, you little and went immediately back to clowning for the rest of the kids, while the lone little boy cried in the corner. The boy did not explain to his parents why he was crying. This is so no one likes clowns. Clowns are weird. Is it John Wayne Gacy? Did he ruin clowns? There's also that Stephen King book, right? It and the movie. There were a couple of movies. Clowns are creepy, no doubt. I don't like clowns. Does anyone like clowns? Clowns got a bad rap. It's got to suck to be a clown, and then all this come out and you'd be like, oh man, I loved being a clown. I was just a good, non-predatory clown. I just loved seeing the smiles on happy children's faces. I'm a good person. And then this happens and you're like, oh man, I got to find a job that I like less than being a clown.
I can feel this anymore.
1976, horrific escalation. Carol and Gacy's marriage was on the rocks. Yeah, no How could it possibly not be? Carol begged her husband to quit PDM contractors and get a job where he had to work 40 hours a week. Gacy replied that he needed to keep managing PDM because he needed to pay for Carol's frivolous spending on her children. Of course, Gacy didn't actually work the long hours that he claimed. He was spending the majority of his time engaging in various perverted activities with his employees and Chicago prostitutes. Things did not improve. In October 1975, Carol asked Gacy for a divorce. Gacy leapt at the opportunity, realizing it would be easier for him to carry on his activities without her. In the divorce papers, Carol cited the reason for the separation as Gacy's infidelity with other women. Generally speaking, however, the split was fairly amicable. Carol and her daughters continued to live with Gacy until February 1976 and continued to socialize with Gacy thereafter, sometimes coming to his house for parties. Why did Gacy get married in the first place? I feel it would be to, hide stuff to make him look normal from the outside, but I don't feel like he's needed that before. Yeah, he was married before, but also because he's apparently so charming and can talk anyone into anything that I don't really feel he would need that. So why did he get married? Just to be excited about getting divorced? It's a bit weird. I mean, although, can we really explain the behavior of John Wayne Gacy? He is completely fucked in the head. After Carol moved out, Gacy began drinking heavily and at the same time developed an addiction to pills, taking various uppers and downers to get him going in the morning and putting him to sleep at night. He also began cruising downtown Chicago twice a week for gay sex. Gacy said that he did not find consensual sexual encounters satisfying. Oh my god. I guess we already knew this. Occasionally he'd recruit the young gay men to work at PDM. Gacy later claimed to have no memory of any of the boys that he murdered in 1976. The first was Daryl Sampson, aged 18, on April the 6th. Gacy buried Sampson in the crawl space of the house, underneath where the dining room was. On the afternoon of May the 14th, Gacy abducted and murdered 15-year-old Randall Reffett as he was returning home from a dentist's appointment. That same day at 11 p.m., Gacy abducted 14-year-old Sam Stapleton just 1 block away from his house and took him back to 8213 Summerdale and murdered him as well. Gacy buried both boys, who were known to be friends, in a common grave in his crawl space. On May the 22nd, Gacy met 16-year-old. Oh my god, this is all so close together. Dude. Oh, I don't like this. On May the 22nd, Gacy met 16-year-old Michael Rossi and invited him to work for PDM contractors. Gacy later claimed to have developed a sexual relationship with Rossi after tricking the boy into handcuffs and attempting to rape him when the events turned quote-unquote consensual. Rossi has denied under oath ever having sex with Gacy, being handcuffed by him, or knowing anything about the murders. Rossi went on to work for Gacy for a total of 2 years. We'll be returning to Rossi shortly. So he's still alive? Or, I mean, he survived this period of time? On June the 3rd, Gacy abducted and murdered 17-year-old Michael Bonin, who was traveling from Chicago to nearby Waukegan. Bonin was later found to be buried in the crawl space underneath a spare bedroom with a rope still tied around his neck. Strangulation had fast become Gacy's preferred MO. Only a week later, on June the 10th, Gacy murdered 16-year-old William Carroll after picking him up from the streets of Chicago's Uptown. Then, between the 13th and the 4th of August, Gacy murdered 3 more victims who've never been identified. All these victims were later discovered in Gacy's crawl space. On the 5th of August, Gacy abducted and murdered 16-year-old James Harkinson via suffocation or strangulation. His family last heard from him that evening when he phoned them, possibly when he was already at Gacy's home. The next day, August the 7th, 18-year-old Rick Johnson was abducted by Gacy as he was coming home from a concert in Chicago's Uptown. He was buried on top of Harkinson's body in the crawl space. Gacy murdered 2 further unidentified victims in August and September. we talked earlier when he went to the grave and just broke down on front of his father's grave, and then people said that the psychologists at the time were like, something broke in his mind at that point, and that's when he started his real string of terror. It seems like this, the divorce and his wife moving out, is really what causes like true escalation. This is an insane degree of escalation. On August the 21st, 1976, PDM employee David Cram, the guy from the introduction, moved into a spare bedroom in Gacy's house. On August the 22nd, Cram's 19th birthday, Gacy had tried to rape Cram while Gacy was dressed as Pogo the Clown, but the younger man had fended the clown off and barricaded himself in his room. Cram was exceedingly lucky. At this point, Gacy had murdered over a dozen men, just like David Cram, and buried them under his house. One or two of those victims were murdered and placed in Gacy's crawl space, while David Cram was still living there. Surprisingly, David Cram did not move out following the attempted rape. This was due to the fact that rent was low, giving Cram a large disposable income to spend on partying, and the youth thought he could quote-unquote handle the older man's lecherous advances. Over the course of the next month, Gacy would occasionally enter Cram's bedroom while the teenager was asleep. Gacy would not be wearing trousers and would have his erection in his hand, slowly stroking himself. Cram had taken to wearing jeans fastened with a belt instead of pajama pants in order to give himself time to wake up and fend Gacy off before he had a chance to rape him. Dude, I mean, I don't want to judge, and he's obviously the victim here, but how much is that low rent worth, dude? Like, you gotta get out of that situation. This is so crazy. But David Cram was playing a dangerous game. One night in late September, Cram awoke to hear the high-pitched sing-song voice of Pogo the Clown calling out to him from the master bedroom. David, 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 you know what I want. A few minutes passed. Gacy then appeared at the threshold of Cram's bedroom, masturbating, and said, quote, David, David, oh David, you don't really want to know who I am, what I'm capable of. Oh, baby boy, maybe it would be a good idea if you gave me what I want. I feel dirty saying those words. Good God. Gacy then leapt onto the bed and grabbed David Cram by the throat. Gacy was apparently growling like an animal. Cram kicked Gacy off him. Gacy immediately lunged back at Cram, grabbing a hold of David's jeans, which ripped as Cram pulled away. The two struggled, and Cram managed to get on top of Gacy, and Cram was about to beat the living shit out of the older man. That would be nice. Then Gacy either fainted or pretended to faint. After Cram got up off him, Gacy quickly, quote-unquote, regained consciousness. Gacy got up, walked to the door of the bedroom, then turned to Cram and smirked at him. Gacy said, still using Pogo's voice, "Ah, shucks, you ain't no fun." David Cram moved out the next day. Good job, David. Good. It's unknown how many of Gacy's victims in 1976 the older man raped and murdered while using the clown persona. Michael Rossi moved into Gacy's house not long after David Cram moved out. Rossi also occasionally took part in Gacy's clowning performances as Pogo's sidekick, named Patches. David, man, you are way too involved in this dude's life for how much of a psycho he is to you. In the early hours of October the 25th, Gacy picked up 16-year-old Kenneth Parker and 14-year-old Michael Marino at the gay cruising corner on Clark and Broadway and brought them both back to his house and murdered both of them at once. A day later, on August the 26th, William Bundy, age 19, who worked for PDM contractors, was invited by Gacy to 8213 West Somerdale Avenue, where he was murdered and buried beneath Gacy's bedroom. Then, sometime between November and December of 1976, Gacy abducted and murdered 21-year-old Francis Alexander, whose body was later found buried beneath Gacy's home office. On the 12th of December, 1976, Gregory Godzik, 17 years old and a recently hired employee of PDM contractors, dropped off his girlfriend at his house after a date. Godzik had recently been digging some trenches in Gacy's crawl space, which the older man had explained were for drainage tiles. In reality, by this point, Gacy had murdered approximately 17 young men, and he was tired of doing the grunt work himself when it came time to bury the next victims under his house. Isn't it super suspicious that all these people who work for his company are dying? Is it someone going to be like, your staff turnover is really high because of death? And that's, police, where are you? I run through a lot of this story. Where are the police? And why are they letting everybody down? Godzik had strict instructions about where to dig and where not to dig. Gacy lied that this was so Godzik did not damage any sewer lines, but in truth, it was so Godzik would not disturb any of the graves. The lie about the sewer lines also conveniently explained why there was a foul stench emitting from the crawl space of the house. Once Godzik had completed the work, he was invited to Gacy's on the evening of December the 12th, where he was murdered. Gacy later recalled waking up the next morning and finding Godzik on the living room floor with his hands cuffed behind his back and a rope wrapped around his neck. Gacy buried Godzik in the trenches that the boy had just dug. When Godzik's family later contacted Gacy asking if he knew anything about the lad's disappearance, Gacy lied that Godzik had told him that he was planning on running away. This was enough for the Chicago police not to investigate. Really? Really? Really?
I don't understand why every person is so bad to each other so often.
The guy who has a police record, who spent time in prison. You believe him? Really, police? Come on, do your job. Gacy also claimed that Godzik had phoned him while he was already on the road, leaving a message on Gacy's answering machine. When his family asked to hear the message, Gacy lied that he had deleted it. Alright, how is he getting away with that? That's insane. When later asked why the police did not investigate the disappearance of Gregory Godzik, Officer Harold Thomas of the Chicago Police explained, quote, "You must realize that you don't treat every missing person case as a possible homicide, but there's so much going on around John Wayne Gacy. There's so much going on, and he's got a criminal record." Oh man, I don't know. And he's got all sort, not just criminal records, but so many arrests for dodgy stuff that surely this deserves special attention. Any crime that happens around him deserves him to be considered as a culprit because just of his crazy arrest record for all sorts of crimes with kids. I don't know, it's just so disappointing. The police just disappoint me so much, so often, which is a shame. Sad. All right. The Slaughter of 77. At the beginning of 1977, John Wayne Gacy was appointed precinct captain of the Democratic Party at Norwood Park. His star continued to rise in local politics, because of course it did. This is so bizarre. He's got these two parallel lives, one that seems barely beneath the surface and would be just exposed if the police even started scratching just a little. On January the 20th, a little over a month after he had killed Gregory Godzik, Gacy was cruising the streets of Chicago when he came across 19-year-old John, pronunciation guideline, John Shitz, unfortunately, but often pronounced by American commenters as Zick. Well, let's give him his proper name, shall we? I don't think we're going to get in trouble for swear words in this video, to be honest, because, you're about 2 hours in, so you know why. The teenager claimed he wanted to sell his car in order to have money to leave town. Gacy offered to take Shitz back to 8213 Summerdale to discuss the sale. Gacy said that he could not remember if his young student, Michael Rossi, was there at the time or not. Gacy and Shitz drank heavily while they chatted. Gacy then claims that he blacked out, waking up at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, discovering Shitz's body on the floor of one of the spare rooms, handcuffed with a rope tied around his neck. Michael Rossi was, according to Gacy, sleeping on the couch in the living room. Gacy dragged the victim's body towards the trap door to the crawl space and dumped it down there. He did not have time to bury Shitz at that time, possibly because Rossi didn't know about the murders, but also possibly not. Over breakfast, Gacy told Rossi about the boy's car. They drove to Clark Street to get it, a 1971 white Plymouth Satellite. Gacy forged the registration with a sloppy approximation of Shitz's signature and sold Rossi the car for $300, though Gacy himself had never paid for it. Rossi made weekly payments that Gacy simply deducted from the young man's paycheck. Rossi later told the police that he had never met John Shitz and had believed the lie Gacy had told him about buying it. Police said that the state attorney's office decided that Rossi's version of events seemed like the most plausible. One, if Gacy had killed Shitz in front of Rossi, then the teenager could have blackmailed Gacy to get the car for free. Two, if Rossi had killed Shitz himself, then why would Gacy feel that he owns the car? Police did not consider a third explanation at the time, that Rossi had fallen under Gacy's spell and had become his lover, remained loyal, and was implicated in other murders, so it never occurred to Rossi to blackmail Gacy. How is this even possible? How can someone fall under Gacy's spell who knows this much about him? Damn. Nonetheless, Rossi was never formally charged by police, who did not see much chance of getting him convicted, and Gacy himself was always vague about Rossi. The only difference of opinion Gacy and Rossi seem to have is that Gacy claimed Rossi was his on-tap source of sex while he lived at 8213 Summerdale, while Rossi denies ever sleeping with Gacy. Given Gacy's proclivities and his conduct toward David Cram, it seems unlikely that young Michael Rossi could have lived with Gacy all that time without ever being accosted and sexually assaulted by Gacy. He's quite frankly lucky he wasn't killed, but the extent to which Rossi participated in Gacy's murders, if at all, will never be known. It's impossible given Gacy's track record of pretty much every young man around him assaulting at some point, that the guy who he lives with, he doesn't, especially after David Cram. Come on. We can't believe that. Whether he was involved or not, we don't know. We can't believe that he had no idea that Gacy was a bit, In the same month of January, John Wayne Gacy began dating a woman regularly. Her name has been withheld. On March the 15th, 1977, John Prestige was last seen leaving a restaurant in downtown Chicago. He had recently claimed to have landed some construction work, but he didn't name the company. His body was dumped in the crawl space on top of Francis Alexander's rotting corpse, who had been killed at least 4 months earlier. Around the same time, Gacy murdered yet another unidentified victim and buried him in the crawl space. In April 1977, Michael Rossi found an apartment and moved out so that Gacy's new flame, the unnamed woman, could move in at 8213 Summerdale. Why is Gacy doing this?
I like the smell.
He clearly doesn't... I don't understand why he gets into relationships with women which he doesn't seem to get any satisfaction from, and then he ends up leaving. I don't get it. And it doesn't seem, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't seem like anyone's doubting that he's a normal guy for some absurd reason. Rossi continued working for Gacy. For the next few months, Gacy's murders ceased. He got engaged to his new female companion. There was friction almost immediately in their relationship. When they attempted to have sex, Gacy would fail to sustain an erection, something which he blamed on the fact that his fiancée had a colostomy bag, which put him off whenever she disrobed. Furthermore, Gacy disliked how his new fiancée was into feminism. She didn't like to cook, and she refused to clean the house, insisting Gacy hire a housekeeper. Gacy was further annoyed that his fiancée, unemployed, talked a big game about sharing expenses and women in the workplace, but didn't help out with PDM contractors and hypocritically seemed to have no problem spending Gacy's money. Gacy broke off the engagement in June and went on a business trip for a week and told his ex-fiancée, quote, "By the time I get back, I want you gone." On July the 5th, a few days after the woman's departure, Gacy struck again. He abducted 19-year-old Matthew Bowman as the young man was making his way from South Chicago to a courthouse to dispute a parking ticket. His body was later found in Gacy's crawl space. He went to court to dispute a parking ticket? How bad is the parking ticket going to be that you go to Why would a court waste time with this? A parking ticket, you just pay it. I get, like, if you've got a huge speeding ticket, sure, go to court if you think you can fight it. If you want to. But a parking ticket? You just pay it. It's not, how much can it be? Is it really worth your time going to court? Is it really worth the court's time? What are you doing?
Don't you realize that this can cost you your life?
A month later, in August 1977, Gacy instructed Michael Rossi to dig more trenches in his crawl space. Gacy was very specific about where he wanted Rossi to dig and marked the area out with sticks. He'd also get Rossi to supervise other workers digging in the crawl space, but Gacy would frequently stick his head through the trapdoor to monitor their efforts, becoming furious if the boys started to deviate from the route he laid out. This account from Rossi is possibly one of the most significant exculpatory testimonies that might imply, though not prove, that the teenager had no knowledge of the murders. Well, good news for Rossi, we don't have to prove that he doesn't have knowledge of the murders, because in a civilized country, you are innocent until you're proven guilty. Yeah. That same month, Rossi was caught stealing gasoline for his car, the 1971 Plymouth Satellite. The license plate of the car had still registered to Gacy's house. When questioned, Gacy told police that he bought the car from a young man, John Schitz, before selling it on to his employee, Rossi. Police confirmed Gacy's story and informed Schitz's mother that her son, a presumed runaway, had sold his car in order to have the money to head out, as Gacy told it, to the state of California to become an actor. Again, Gacy's being questioned by the police. Don't they have some record of this? And I know he's not getting charged with any of this stuff, but he's getting arrested all the time. And he's giving all this testimony about missing kids all the time. Is no one at the police station being like, why does that name Gacy come up so often? It's really, I know it's kind of like what the policeman said earlier, like you don't treat every runaway as a homicide because otherwise it would be impossible to do work. But, he comes up all the time. All the time. And he's been to prison. What's going on? A few weeks later, on September the 15th, 18-year-old Robert Gilroy was hitchhiking just 4 blocks from 8213 Summerdale to the Blue Ribbon Stables. His body was dumped in the newly dug trenches. The date of this abduction is puzzling because Gacy was known to be in Pennsylvania on business at this time, which is why some analysts theorize that Gacy did indeed have accomplices who were carrying out murders of their own. Rossi, of course, is foremost among the suspects. 10 days later, on September the 25th, Gacy picked up 19-year-old John Mowry as the young man walked to his apartment after visiting his mother. Gacy claims to have had no memory whatsoever of this murder, yet his body was later found in Gacy's crawl space. A month later, on October the 17th, Russell Nelson, aged 21, who was in Chicago from Minnesota visiting friends, was last seen outside of a bar not too far from the city's gay district. Gacy murdered him and buried him in the crawl space. Nelson had a fiancée back in Minnesota, and they'd already picked out the names of their potential children. On November the 11th, Robert Winch, a 16-year-old runaway from Kalamazoo, Michigan, was abducted and murdered by Gacy and thrown into the crawl space. The following week, on November the 18th, Tommy Boyling, aged 20, had been hanging out at a Chicago bar on North Street watching the movie Bonnie and Clyde on a television there. Tommy exited the bar, going home to his wife and 1-year-old son. When his body was later exhumed from Gacy's crawl space, his wife identified him by his wedding ring. On December the 9th, David Tolsma, a 19-year-old, still living with his mother, had just finished his basic training in the US Marine Corps, waiting to be deployed, departed from his home at 7 p.m. in order to go to a rock concert in Indiana. He hitchhiked his way there and somehow wound up in John Gacy's crawl space instead. This rounded out the year of 1977, with Gacy's total body count being 28 or 29 victims. The torture of Robert Donnelly. But the year was not over. On the night of December the 30th, according to John Wayne Gacy, he pulled up to a Chicago bus stop on Montrose Avenue a little after midnight. There, he found 19-year-old Robert Donnelly and offered the teenager a lift. As they were driving, Gacy proposed to Donnelly that they make a BDSM sex arrangement. Donnelly named a price for his services. Gacy claimed to police that this was all worked out consensually. That night, Gacy said they bound each other and role-played through several dominance and submission acts using dildos. Gacy then claimed after about 7 hours, Donnelly took a shower and Gacy drove him to work. Gacy later told police he didn't wind up paying Donnelly for his services, probably in order to avoid the charge of soliciting prostitution. Wait, well, you still solicited prostitution and then you also committed fraud. Is that what it is? Like, you didn't pay someone, or theft or whatever. You told someone you'd pay them and then you didn't. That doesn't mean you didn't do one crime, it just means you did 2 crimes. How can you be such a big criminal and not understand crime? Donnelly, however, staggering into a local police station on December the 31st, told a slightly different story. He said that Gacy had impersonated a police officer and held him at gunpoint, telling him to get into the back seat, where he was immediately handcuffed. There was no talk of payment. Donnelly was not a prostitute. He was not gay. Driving back to 8213 Summerdale, Gacy forced the teenager inside. There he threw a glass of Everclear in the young man's face and forced another down his throat. Donnelly claimed he was then raped several times, during which Gacy wrapped a rope around Donnelly's neck and choked him. Gacy then aimed a gun at him and played a game of Russian roulette. Gacy pulled the trigger multiple times, one click followed by another click. Then bang, the gun went off. But Donnelly was still alive. The rounds in the gun had obviously been a blank. Gacy laughed at Donnelly mockingly. Then Gacy choked Donnelly with his hands, forcing the teenager to pass out. It's like, Jesus Christ, whose story do we believe here? Well, obviously this guy, because this sounds exactly like what Gacy does, doesn't it? When Donnelly awoke, he was in Gacy's bathroom, handcuffed and gagged. His head was then dunked repeatedly and held underwater, while Gacy mocked him in a high-pitched sing-song voice, saying things like, "Aren't we playing fun games tonight?" On the 4th time Donnelly's head was submerged, he passed out. At one point, Donnelly was in so much distress that he begged Gacy to kill him. Gacy merely giggled and replied, "I'm getting round to it." The next morning, Gacy drove Donnelly to his place of work and dumped him there, telling them to went to the police that nobody would ever believe him. As Gacy drove away, Donnelly took note of his license plate number. Gacy was pulled in for questioning, finally, by Detective Ted Janus on January the 6th, 1978. When Janus called State Attorney Jerry Lathero asking to charge Gacy with kidnapping and sexual assault, Lathero refused. He stated in both versions of the story, Gacy had quote-unquote offered Donnelly a drink. He had driven Donnelly to work the next morning. Gacy was here we fucking go. Here we go. Gacy was a respected member of the Illinois Democratic Party. Donnelly, by contrast, was in and out of therapy after the death of his father. How is that fucking relevant? He also appeared mentally unstable, according to Lathrow, and he spoke with a stutter. How is that relevant? Lathrow added, even though Gacy had a sex conviction offense from Iowa from several years ago, he was much more credible than Donnelly. Why? How? What are you talking about? Why would Donnelly go to the police station and report this crime? He has zero motivation to frame Gacy for anything. What the f*** is wrong with you? And with that utter miscarriage of justice, Gacy was free to continue his crimes in 1978. You f***ing bastard. What's your name? Lathrow. What the fuck are you up to? You piece of shit. Allegedly, in my opinion. Given that Gacy later claimed amnesia about a lot of the murders, and given that Donnelly was the only survivor so far who didn't manage to physically overpower Gacy and escape, Donnelly's account gives us the clearest idea of what sort of sexual sadism Gacy would inflict on his victims once he had restrained them. It gives us the best idea of what Gacy's 24 or more victims who he killed in 1976 and 1977 must have suffered before Gacy murdered them. Yeah, so he was torturing them. It wasn't just rape and murder, it was torture. Which, I mean, it's just a horrible story. This was not just a matter of rape and strangulation. Gacy toyed with these young men, abusing them both physically and psychologically. What is also notable is that even when not dressed as Pogo the Clown, his persona appears to have been on display and in control during the multiple acts of rape, torture, and murder. Hence why the title Killer Clown was not just a clever headline to sell newspapers. It was all too horribly accurate. As for why Gacy let Robert Donnelly go, in light of Gacy's total dishonesty when recalling his crimes, we'll never know for certain. But it is possible that Gacy had a good reason to believe that he could not be touched. By this time, PDM Contractors was making over $200,000 a year or $925,000 in today's money, making Gacy a respected local businessman. He was also becoming a grandee in the local Democratic Party. It is possible, just as in Iowa, Gacy had made friends in high places. Your friends in high places should not, in any sort of country that calls itself a democracy and to have rule of law, should be able to get you out of something like this. They shouldn't, honestly, corruption is super fucked up. You shouldn't have a friend in high places who could get you out of a fucking parking ticket. And that, I don't know if it's true, but I was watching that TV show, Billions, and the guy gets pulled over and he has a little card that says he's a friend of the policeman's union, and it gets him out of speeding tickets. And I'm like, is that real? Because if so, that's fucked up and should not be a thing. Sadistic 78. William Kindred was 19 years old, a tough bugger with the nickname Shotgun who lived on the rough side of Chicago. He was the sort of man you didn't want to mess with, even if you, too, were at the pinnacle of health and strength. On the night of February the 16th, he left the apartment of his fiancée, Mary Jo Paulus, and went back to his own place. There, he told his roommate he was going to go out to a bar and get a little bit hammered. That's where Gacy found William Shotgun Kindred, had abducted him at gunpoint and took him back to 8213 Summerdale, tortured him, and murdered him. Oh man. I was really hoping this was the guy. This was the one guy who it's Gacy finally bit off more than he could chew, and this guy beat the shit out of him and then went to the police with him in handcuffs and was like, look at this piece of shit I found. You should search his basement. Sorry it didn't work out that way, William. His corpse was later identified by Mary Jo by the religious medallion that she'd given him as a symbol of their engagement. William Kindred was the last victim interred in John Wayne Gacy's crawl space. At that point, the trenches had become filled to the brim with bodies. Gacy also added, under interrogation, that he was worried about the effect all that digging would have on his quote-unquote heart condition. On March the 21st, 1978, Jeff Rignall, aged 26, left his girlfriend's apartment to head to a bar. Rignall and his girlfriend had been arguing over the fact that despite being in a relationship together, Rignall seemed to prefer sleeping with men. As Rignall walked to the bar, an Oldsmobile pulled up in front of him, blocking his path. Gacy stuck his flabby head out of the window and complimented the young man on his tan. "I just got back from Florida," Rignall explained. Gacy asked Rignall where he was off to, and the latter named a local gay bar. Gacy offered him a ride. All the way, Gacy offered Rignall a hit from his joint. They continued driving while Gacy ran his mouth as usual. Rignall made appropriate noises and just stared at the road. When Gacy offered Rignall a second hit of the joint, Rignall turned his head to accept, and to his surprise, he was hit in the face with a rag soaked in chloroform instead. Wait, oh no, I was kind of thinking there's no more bodies in the basement. But he's just going to find somewhere else to bury the bodies, isn't he? Ay. When Rignall regained consciousness, he was strapped to a car seat and he couldn't move. Gacy hit him again with chloroform, and again Rignall's world passed into darkness. When Rignall awoke a second time, he was still in his car. He noticed the exit sign Cumberland and realized his kidnapper had been driving on the Kennedy Expressway and was just turning off it. Rignall was chloroformed yet again, and he passed out. When Rignall awoke the third time, he was lying on a couch in somebody's home. There was a foul smell emanating from the place. It smelled like rotting flesh, and it seemed to be coming out of the floorboards. He noticed a large bar in the room stuck with a legion of booze bottles. He took note of a painting of a clown above the bar, and the picture was bordered by twinkling Christmas lights, despite it being late March. It was almost like the clown picture was some sort of shrine. Then Rignall spotted Gacy, who was at the bar, fixing a drink. "Why did you do that to me?" Rignall asked groggily. Gacy didn't answer. Instead he said, "There's a gun under the bar, and I'd sooner kill you as look at you." Rignall froze in fear. Gacy sipped his drink and walked over to where the young man lay on the couch. Gacy casually looked down at him and lit up another joint. Gacy even offered his victim a hit, which the younger man, confused and frightened, robotically accepted. The second time Gacy offered Rignall a hit from the joint, just as in the car, he suddenly jumped on Rignall and chloroformed him. Rignall awoke sometime later with Gacy slapping him in the face to rouse him. Rignall had been stripped completely naked, and his arms and head were trapped within the holes of some kind of pillory device. The pillory was attached to the ceiling with long dangling chains, so that Rignall was forced to stay upright, no matter what befell him. Rignall's legs were spread apart and similarly locked together with a smaller plank of wood. Rignall just hung there as Gacy stood in front of him. The older man was also naked, his bloated folds and stretch marks making him look like an obscene object as he stood there, rhythmically stroking himself. Rignall took note of the fact that Gacy's stomach nearly obscured his genitals, and the man's bloated pubis and thighs had reduced the length of the penis to almost pitiable proportions. Oh man, this is gross. But I get the feeling we're back in another person's testimony. This feels like the witness rather than Gacy or forensics. So I'm getting the feeling that old Rignall here is going to survive, which is great. Although, Jesus Christ, to go through this. Then Rignall saw the collection of several long leather whips, metal rods and pokers, and a number of large plastic dildos. Gacy then forced Rignall to fillet him, ordering him to mumble and gurgle the entire time, saying, "I love it. I love it." Rignall was chloroformed yet again. When he awoke, Gacy penetrated the victim with one of the metal rods. Again, Gacy demanded that Rignall say, "I love it." Another larger metal instrument was then inserted into him, and then Rignall was chloroformed again. When he awoke, Rignall felt Gacy's head on his shoulder as the older man raped him. There was also a second man, an accomplice, on his knees in front of Rignall, filleting him. When the second man realized that Rignall was conscious, he was chloroformed again. So at this point, we know that Gacy did not work alone. Whether the accomplice was Michael Rossi or another of Gacy's PDM boys, or a friend from the Moose Club, or a fellow grandee in the Democratic Party, is not known. All that Rignall got a glimpse of was some brown hair parted down the middle. We do know that Michael Rossi had brown hair, which he indeed parted down the middle, but given Gacy's previous ability in Iowa to form a large ring of co-conspirators and criminal associates, it really could have been anyone. Whatever further violations and degradations befell Rignall that night, he wasn't conscious for them. When Rignall next awoke, he was lying in the snow in Lincoln Park at the base of a statue of Alexander Hamilton. He was clothed again, but his pants were not zipped up, and he was in pain all over his body. He was bruised, burned, bleeding. His face was badly scarred. Rignall managed to stagger back to his girlfriend's, where she embraced him and comforted him before calling the police. Rignall spent a week in hospital being treated for facial burns, rectal bleeding, and chronic pain. The chloroform Rignall had been dosed with multiple times had severely and permanently damaged his liver. This is insane. Why? I don't know. I know I don't want to say it, but why did Gacy let him live? He can identify him, and he went to his house, and then he lets him live when he doesn't let anyone else live? Why? What's going on? He's asking, this is going to be big. This is going to get him caught. I mean, if the police were competent, this is going to get him caught. Over the next 3 months. Never mind, I take it back. It's not going to get him caught, apparently. Because apparently Gacy just doesn't get caught. Over the next 3 months, Gacy tortured and murdered an unknown number of victims, and given he no longer interred the bodies under his house, and the fact that he's a lying sack of we'll never know. I am, at this point, so angry that I had to stop writing. To know that so many victims probably experienced a similar fate to Rignall before they died, it fills me with rage. Yeah, I'll also say I've been recording this all day, basically, because otherwise I'd go insane.
Tell me about it.
It's like even David, when we were emailing back and forth about this, he was telling me that he had to stop writing it, and he was saying you'll need... The problem is I can't record these over 2 days because I've tried it once or twice and I totally lose track of what happens earlier in the episode, so I knew I had to do it over 1 day, and David was like, well, just dedicate a day. So I dedicated Friday to record this. Quite looking forward to the weekends. I mean, yeah, it's just... It's a rough one. It's a real rough one. The police told Rignall that his description of the Oldsmobile, a common car, and partial identification of a custom license plate would not be sufficient to catch his torturer. However, Rignall was not easily dissuaded. Gathering together 2 friends, Rignall spent the next month staking out the Kennedy Expressway near the exit sign labelled Cumberland, which he remembered in between being chloroformed in the car. Rignall felt certain that this was the route to his torturer's home. All he needed was to wait for an Oldsmobile to drive along the same route and follow it. In April, there was a groundbreaking ceremony for a retirement centre for which Gacy had built the refreshment stand and donated trucks for the construction. Gacy also worked as Pogo the Clown alongside Michael Rossi's Patches at various events to raise money for the centre. This Michael Rossi guy, obviously, we don't know, but some suspicious behaviour, right? I think we're all thinking that, but we're not saying that because, obviously, I guess Michael Rossi has never been charged with a crime. But suspicious, isn't it? At the ceremony, Gacy volunteered to watch the gate and do crowd control. Michael Blandage, Chicago's mayor, attended the event and he was photographed shaking hands with Gacy. Meanwhile, in mid-April, Rignall was taking out the Kennedy Expressway with a couple of friends when they spotted an Oldsmobile with a custom license plate. They followed the car to 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. Rignall took note of the license plate number PDM42 and went to the police. There, please, come on. There, police told Rignall that John Wayne Gacy, the owner of the car, had been questioned for kidnapping and torture of Robert Donnelly only a few months ago, and that he'd done jail time for a sex offence. How is this not going to end up in him getting arrested and them searching his house, finding the bodies? Police, please stop letting me down. Come on, let's go. At this point in the interview, the police asked Rignall if he was gay. Rignall said yes, and then to quote Rignall, from that point, I got no cooperation at all. What the fuck? What the fuck? Get your shit together, police. This is not okay. Fucking homophobes. Fucking useless homophobes. 2 weeks went by, with Rignall phoning the police twice daily, asking if he could see a mugshot of John Wayne Gacy in order to identify him. Finally, police relented, and Rignall was given several books of unlabeled mugshots from which he correctly identified John Wayne Gacy. This wasn't enough for the assistant state attorney, who didn't believe the victim's story and refused to press charges. To quote Rignall, when I started getting into the physical aspect of what the man had done to me, they began to make me believe that I was the crazy one and that he was a model citizen. I hope all you people feel horrible about what you did. The police, the courts, all of these people involved and are just ignoring this. I hope you feel bad. You should feel bad. On May the 6th, 1978, Gacy was organising a parade for the visit of First Lady Rosalind Carter to Chicago. For some reason, Secret Service background checks failed to discover that Gacy had a criminal record in Iowa, because of course they fucking did, and had a checkered past with numerous accusations in Chicago. That evening at a private reception, John Wayne Gacy was photographed shaking the hands of the First Lady of the United States. Mrs. Carter later signed the photograph, to John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter. Christ almighty. Rignall's revenge. On the 7th of May, the day after Mrs. Carter's visit, exasperated for not getting help from the state's attorney's office, Jeff Rignall's lawyer issued a civil assault warrant calling for Gacy's arrest. I don't know what that is. A civil assault warrant is essentially the lawyer informing the accused person that a warrant has been issued and giving the victim authority, with police assistance, to escort the accused to a courtroom where a civil trial, rather than a criminal trial, would take place. Whoa, what is that? I've never heard of this. What will basically follow is the accused being sued by the victim rather than facing a conviction and jail time, sort of like how O.J. Simpson won the criminal trial for the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, but lost the civil trial. However, the Chicago police refused to participate in the arrest of Gacy. One officer even had the sheer audacity to say to Rignall that 8213 Somerdale was, quote, too long of a drive. I've got no words for the police incompetence in this one, or just ignorance, or just ignoring. or just ignoring people. It's horrible. On the 20th of June, John Wayne Gacy abducted, tortured, and murdered 20-year-old Timothy O'Rourke, who had left his apartment and gone for some cigarettes. Timothy had recently been hired by PDM contractors. Given that Gacy's crawl space was now full of bodies, he threw O'Rourke's body off the I-55 bridge into the Des Plaines River. His body was found 2 weeks later, and it was not identified at the time. On June the 15th, Rignall himself drove out to 8213 Summerdale. There he met Gacy's mother, Marion, who was visiting with the summer. Marion Gacy said that her son had just popped out and would be back soon. She asked Rignall if he would be attending the party that they'd be having that evening. Rignall said, "Are you kidding me? I don't know if your son told you, but there's a warrant out for his arrest. Do you know that your son was convicted of a sex crime in Iowa?" Marion Gacy slammed the door in his face. Gacy returned. Rignall, talking to police on a nearby payphone, finally managed to get some officers to show up and serve the warrants, but they couldn't find Gacy. While he was waiting, Rignall claims that he was approached by Michael Rossi, who allegedly asked Rignall not to tell Gacy's mother about the details of the rape. At long last, Gacy was found and served with the warrant. The court date was set for September the 13th. Wait, I don't understand how a lawyer can issue a warrant. Is that allowed? I mean, if you're suing someone, which is what this is a civil case, you get, I don't know, it's never happened to me, touching some wood, but you get served and then you have to show up to court. You're like legally obliged to. And if you don't, well, they're just going to be like, they'll rule in the other person's favor and then there'll be a judgment against you and you'll have to pay. And if you don't pay, then I guess they'll force you to pay somehow, like through some, I don't know how it works, but there'll be some like legal thing that you have to. But to get someone, take them, and then take them to court for a civil charge? I didn't even realize that was possible. Fascinating. And in this case, fantastic. Gacy, meanwhile, filed a counter-complaint in which he said that Rignall had assaulted him. Holy shit. Again, Rignall and his lawyer demanded that the state attorney look at the charges, to which, according to Rignall, the man replied, "What the hell? This is only a butt. People get shot in this city, and they're not charged with a felony." Who the do you think what the do you think you're saying? You're just saying, oh, you know, I'm at my job for the big thing, so how can you expect me not to be at my job for the little things? You f***ing idiot, in my opinion. On September the 13th, 1978, Gacy did not turn up to the civil trial. Rignall's lawyer got Gacy's countercharge dropped and the civil arrest warrant reissued. Michael Rossi, who had shown up to the trial, okay, so Gacy's, patches to his Pogo, who had shown up at the trial, testified that Gacy was in New York on the night of Rignall's assault. Uh-oh, Rossi. You just committed perjury? That's perjury, right? Where you lie. Because if you lie in a civil court about something, that's perjury, which is a crime which can carry jail time, right? Am I imagining that, or is that what happened to Martha Stewart? Like, she did something wrong that was a civil offense, and then she lied about it. Was it Martha Stewart? Someone got into trouble this way and ended up going to jail. Someone famous. I can't remember what it was, but I find that interesting. But look, if Rossi has been involved in this in some other way, I'm just going to say that perjury is probably the least of his problems here. A few days later, Gacy's lawyer got in touch with Rignall's lawyer. Ultimately, Gacy settled out of court, agreeing to pay compensation. Rignall's revenge amounted to getting $3,000, which was the best Rignall's lawyer thought that they could do. Meanwhile, Rignall, who was badly wounded and scarred from the incident and who had since lost 40 pounds or 18 kilograms in the month following the trauma, had medical bills that exceeded $25,000 in the 1970s. This is crazy. And he has a permanently damaged liver from the chloroform. Don't forget that. A bridge too far. On November the 3rd, 1978, Frank Landgren, aged 19, a known drug dealer and pimp, was released from prison on bail for the charge of assaulting his girlfriends. At 2 a.m. on November the 4th, Frank met his father at a bar on the north side. After getting drunk, Frank said he was going to look for his girlfriend. He was last seen at 3 a.m., staggering along Foster Avenue near the gay cruising corner of Clark and Broadway. He was abducted, tortured, and murdered by John Wayne Gacy. His body was discovered 8 days later, naked but gagged with his own underwear, floating in the Des Plaines River. The cause of death was that something had caused the victim to be sick, whereupon he drowned on his own vomit. All of these deaths following when the police could have and should have taken action, and the justice system. I hope they weigh heavily on the people who failed these people. On November the 24th, Gacy murdered PDM employee James Mazara, who disappeared after having Thanksgiving dinner with his family. His body was similarly found in Des Plaines River, only a mile downstream from the I-55 bridge, where Gacy later claimed he dumped 4 or 5 bodies. 4 or 5? He's killed so many people he doesn't remember. It's disgusting. On December the 11th, 1978, Gacy entered the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines. There he encountered 15-year-old Robert Peist, who was working there part-time. Robert was an honor roll student, a Boy Scout, and an avid photographer and a member of the school's gymnastics team. He was straight. Rob was working the shift from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., whereupon his mother, Elizabeth, would pick him up and bring him home to celebrate her 46th birthday with ice cream and cake. Gacy had been summoned to the pharmacy by the store's owner, who wanted Gacy's assessment for some possible renovations. Gacy examined the place, and his work estimate was rejected by the owner. Gacy left only to return again at 8 p.m. because he had accidentally left his appointment book at the store. During Gacy's second visit, he offered Robert Piest a job at PDM Contractors, claiming the pay to be between $5 and $7 an hour for new hires, considerably higher than the $2.85 Piest was making at the pharmacy. When Elizabeth Piest came to pick up her son at 9 p.m., Robert asked her to wait a little, as he wanted to talk to some contractor about a job that had offered him. Elizabeth said that she was fine, and she'd browse the aisles while she waited. Robert went outside and talked to Gacy, who sat in his car. Gacy claims that he didn't have time to talk to Piest right now, but they could chat if he jumped in the car, while he quickly picked something up from his house. Gacy then promised to return Robert to the pharmacy or to his home. Back at 8213 Summerdale, Gacy claims that Piest drank 7-Up and refused to touch any booze. Gacy suggested if Piest wanted to make money that badly, he should become a rents boy. Piest didn't respond to that suggestion and insisted on the construction job. Gacy then asked if he would do anything for money, and Piest replied that he was a hard worker. The lad was totally unreceptive to sex talk, refusing to even be taken aback by the innuendo. Perhaps the 15-year-old was just too innocent to notice. At that point, Gacy claimed the offer to show Robert Piest a handcuff trick, a deception that had long become part of Gacy's MO. Robert was unfortunately fooled. No sooner had the boy been cuffed than Gacy said, "I'm going to rape you, and there's nothing you can do about it." At this point, Robert burst into tears. Gacy took the boy to one of the bedrooms. Gacy claims that he then affixed a rope around the victim's neck, stuffed a wad of cloth down his throat, and took a phone call with his business associate, Richard Raphael, while Piest suffocated to death on the floor. Raphael later testified that Gacy spoke calmly, with a normal tone of voice, and that he didn't seem even the slightest bit troubled or distracted. Gacy promptly picked up Piest's body and stored it in the attic. Back at the pharmacy, around 9:20 p.m., Elizabeth Piest sat at the candy counter, waiting for her son. None of the staff had seen him, so Elizabeth went home, worried, to wait for him to call. At 9:45 p.m., Elizabeth communicated her misgivings to her husband. She called the pharmacy, and Robert hadn't returned. Elizabeth asked who the contractor who offered him a job was. "John Gacy," the pharmacy owner replied. I know I've said this a million times, and there's still a few pages left in this script, but please, come on, police. I feel I've said this 2 or 3 times already. Stop letting me down. Get your together. It's time. It's time. It's time. The investigation. The Piest family filed a missing persons report with the police, who told them to go home and wait. They couldn't do this. On the night of the 11th and 12th, the Piest family, older sister Kerry, older brother Ken, and father Harold, drove around Des Plaines looking for any sign of Robert. Elizabeth stayed by the home phone. They even used the family German Shepherds, giving them scraps of Rob's clothing to smell, and set them loose at various points around the suburb, seeing if the dogs could sniff him down. The next morning, the Piests were back at the police station, where the police determined from interviewing Elizabeth that Robert probably wasn't a runaway. Detective James Pickle looked at Gacy's record and found that he'd been convicted of sodomy in Iowa, and he had an outstanding civil warrant for sexual assault. He also had been arrested and questioned in connection with several other sex crimes. Wait, why does he have an outstanding civil warrant for sexual assault? Didn't he settle that? That's weird. I thought they'd settled that by now and he'd got the $3,000. Or maybe this was happening during that time. We might have gone back in time, Elizabeth. I assume we did that. There's a lot of dates. I'm not 100% keeping track. At 9 p.m. on December the 12th, Lieutenant Joe Kazensiak paid a visit to 8213 Summerdale. Michael Rossi was there and was told to wait outside. Under questioning, Gacy denied that he had offered Robert Piest a job. Kazensiak asked Gacy if he could come down to the police station to fill out a witness form. Gacy phoned his mother to say that he couldn't help with arranging a funeral of an uncle who had just died. Kazensiak asked Gacy when he could come down. "I don't know, maybe in an hour," Gacy replied. "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" At the time, Robert Piest's body was still lying in the attic. After the police left, Gacy did some chores, sank a few beers, dropped a Valium, and smoked a joint. He then went up to the attic, wrapped Piest's body in a blanket, and carried it to the trunk of his Oldsmobile. He deposited the clothes Piest was wearing in a Salvation Army donation box and drove to the I-55 bridge on the Des Plaines River, and there he dumped the body. At 2:30 a.m. on December the 13th, running 4 hours late to the police station, Gacy hit a patch of ice and spun off the road. He required a tow truck to pull our car out of a muddy ditch. At 3:20 a.m., Gacy entered the police station, caked in mud, asking for Lieutenant Kazenzak. The desk officer said the lieutenant had waited until 1 a.m. and then gone home. Gacy returned to the police station around noon. Under interrogation, Gacy denied of having talked to Robert Peast at the pharmacy. He filled out a written statement detailing his movements on the night of the 11th. The police kept Gacy talking for 4 hours, enough time for them to gain a search warrant to 8213 Summerdale. Hell yes. And Gacy grudgingly gave the police a set of keys. Here we go. At 8213 Summerdale, police found several bottles of Valium and atropine, capsules of amyl nitrate, a bottle that smelled of chloroform, a stash of marijuana, some porn, a school ring from Maine West High with the initials JAS, a pair of handcuffs, a 2x4 with holes drilled in it which looked like a restraining device, books on homosexuality and pedophilia, several police badges, a starter pistol with some blank shells, an 18-inch dildo, a blue parka like Peast was wearing the night of his abduction, a length of nylon rope, and a photo receipt from the Nissan pharmacy in the trash. They also found a blood stain on the carpet in the hall in front of the bathroom. When police looked into the crawl space, they saw no signs of recent digging and concluded Robert Peast had not been buried down there. Gacy was taken down to the station for further questioning, where he was informed that his Oldsmobile and all PDM vehicles had been impounded. Gacy was released from the station at 8 p.m. that evening. Gacy spent the night at his sister's house, reluctant to spend the night inside 8213 Summerdale. Why did you let him arrest the fucker? Put him in prison. Don't give him bail. He's suspected of murder. Ah! Oh my God. And at that point, he fled to Mexico. No, he didn't, but Jesus Christ, what the hell? On December the 14th, the next day, the police decided to place Gacy under 24-hour surveillance using two-man teams which alternated 12-hour shifts. The same day, they brought Michael Rossi in for questioning, but the young man denied any knowledge of Peist's disappearance. On December the 15th, police spoke on the phone with Carol Lofgren, who said they might want to look into John Budkovich, who had disappeared 3 years earlier. Wait, who's Carol Lofgren? Is that his ex-wife? I think that's his ex-wife, right? The second wife. That same day, Rossi phoned and said they might want to look into Greg Godzik, who had disappeared in December 1976. Meanwhile, the high school ring found in Gacy's house was linked to one John A. Schitz, who had disappeared in early 1977. His mother informed the police that he'd sold his Plymouth Satellite at the time of his disappearance. The car was quickly traced to Michael Rossi and by extension John Wayne Gacy. Wait, why is Michael Rossi phoning in and saying that they might want to look into someone? Isn't Rossi supposed to be on his side? The car was quickly traced to Michael Rossi and by extension John Wayne Gacy. At this point, the police had some inkling of what they had on their hands, and the entire Des Plaines Police Department began working the Gacy case, with each staff member putting in 16 to 24-hour shifts. Good, finally, let's go! On December the 16th, police interviewed Richard Raphael and David Cram, who both said that Gacy was extremely scared and paranoid since the 11th. That night, a two-man surveillance team followed Gacy to the Moose Club, where he was the life and soul of the party. A waitress brought the two police officers drinks, claiming that, quote, Mr. Gacy wanted to take care of his bodyguards. Later, Gacy walked up to their table and said he was leaving. They followed him to a nearby restaurant. There, Gacy interrogated the two surveillance officers about who they were, which they fessed up to. Gacy then reasserted innocence and left, heading to 3 more bars that evening, with the police following in his wake. At the third bar, 6 or 7 drinks in, Gacy started talking loudly, intending for the officers to hear about how many politicians and high-ranking police he had in his pocket. Okay, yeah, but at this point, they suspect you of multiple murders. And while you have managed to get out of some truly crazy shit, which is mega corrupt as we addressed before, the multiple murders is, that you're not going to get out of that one. At 5 a.m., Gacy, by now quite drunk, went to the Golden Bear restaurant, a local greasy spoon. At this point, Gacy proclaims that he was connected to the Democratic Party and a notorious Chicago mobster. Gacy warned the police that he would not be harassed. Gacy then threatened the officers that he had his own real bodyguard that, quote, carried a .357 Magnum and wouldn't think twice about wasting you. Holy shit. When the officers were unmoved, Gacy turned friendly again, chatting with them for about an hour. At 6 a.m. on December the 17th, after a sleepless night out on the lash, Gacy went home. What are you doing, though? Also, in a completely unrelated thing, who goes out by themselves and just goes around to different bars getting super fucked up and then goes home at 6 o'clock in the morning by yourself? It's a very strange evening you've had, Mr. Gacy. That morning, police let sniffer dogs with Robert Peist sent into Gacy's Oldsmobile. One of them laid down in the back seat, giving the death reaction. That afternoon, Gacy was drinking again and sat down and chatted with a different two-man team of surveillance officers. Again, he talked about all of his friends in high places. He talked about his fictional bodyguard with the Magnum. Among other things, he talked about being a volunteer clown. Gacy said, quote, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." He's losing his mind. I mean, properly. He's obviously insane. He's a psychopath. But now he's, falling apart. Gacy continued to drink into the evening, chatting up the night shift officers when they came to relieve their counterparts, babbling for hours at a time, but revealing nothing incriminating. The officers observed that Gacy's mental health was deteriorating. There we go. On December the 18th, police traced the serial number on the Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt. They found at Gacy's house to a pharmacy employee, Kim Byers. On questioning, Byers explained that on the evening of December the 11th, she had put the receipt in the pocket of Robert Peist's blue Parker, which she had borrowed momentarily to keep out of the cold. She recalled that Peist had left wearing that parka. Elizabeth Peist confirmed that the blue parka had belonged to her son. The police could now place Robert Peist at Gacy's house on the night of the 11th. Michael Rossi was interrogated again that evening, where he divulged in 1977 that he had spread lime across the crawl space of Gacy's house. Police began preparing evidence to apply for a second warrant to search Gacy's home. On December the 19th, Gacy's lawyers sued the Des Plaines police for $750,000, citing harassment and demanding that they drop the 24-hour surveillance. The court hearing was set for the 22nd. It seemed likely that the police would be forced to drop the surveillance. They needed to get that search warrant fast. There's enough evidence. Just go get the fucking search warrant. Let's go. Come on. That same day, Gacy invited the surveillance team of two men to 8213 Summerdale for a voluntary tour. One of the officers kept Gacy talking while the other snooped around the house, unsuccessfully trying to copy down the serial number on a small Motorola TV, which officers suspected had belonged to John Sitz back in 1977. When he was in the hallway, the officer noticed a faint putrid smell. He went to the bathroom and flushed the toilet. At the same time, a gust of air came blowing through the vent next to the bathroom, emanating from the crawl space. It was the smell of rotting flesh. On December the 20th, police pulled in both Michael Rossi and David Cram for questioning. Rossi submitted to a polygraph test, but became agitated and cut the test short. He did, however, reveal that he thought Gacy had buried bodies in his crawl space and that he had been previously ordered to dig trenches. David Cram was more forthcoming. He recounted Gacy's multiple attempted rapes of him in the summer of 1976. Cram revealed that he had also been tasked by Gacy to spread lime and dig trenches. That clinched it for the police. Gacy had been murdering young boys and had buried them in his crawl space. Now all they needed was a damn warrant to go and look for them. Michael Rossi returned to his house that evening and found that Gacy and the two-man surveillance team were waiting for him. Rossi said he wasn't comfortable being alone with Gacy and asked the two police officers to accompany them inside. After a while, Gacy managed to assure Rossi that he meant him no harm, and the surveillance team were asked to wait outside. Gacy and Rossi talked for 30 minutes, during which Rossi communicated to Gacy that the police were onto him. At that point, Gacy'd be like, no fucking shit. They're following me around 24 hours a day. And they know there's something in the basement. And when they dig it up, they're going to find there's something in the basement. Thanks, Michael. At 11 p.m., Gacy came storming out of Rossi's house. He sped up the highway with the police following him, hitting 100 miles an hour until he arrived at his lawyer's office. There, Gacy went inside, leaving the surveillance team out on the street. Up in his lawyer's office, Gacy popped several pills of Valium and drank 3/4 of a bottle of scotch that his lawyers, Amarante and Stevens, had in their office. Gacy pointed out a copy of the Daily Herald on the desk, featuring a front-page article on the disappearance of Robert Peist. Gacy slurred, "The boy, he's dead. He's in the river." Gacy then proceeded to ramble drunkenly for the next 4 hours, confessing to his lawyers all of his crimes. At 3:30 a.m., Gacy passed out on a couch. His lawyers emerged from the office to talk to the surveillance team. Amarante and Stevens said to the police that what Gacy just told them was privileged material, but then they begged the police to immediately arrest Gacy. Amarante suggested that the police block Gacy's car with their own vehicle or shoot out his tires. Stevens started taking drags of cigarettes that he had forgotten to light. The defense lawyers were terrified of their own client. They can't be his defense lawyers, can they? If you know, isn't it supposed to be like, I mean, obviously it doesn't always work like this, but if you know your client's guilty, you can't represent them. If they, right? Isn't that right? I mean, in an ideal world, I know it's not probably how it actually works in reality. But I mean, oh my God. These poor lawyers, Jesus Christ, what they must have just heard. God damn. I'd be like, I'm not fucking representing you, fucking piece of shit. This place is full of kids. Upon waking up on the morning of December the 21st, Amarante informed Gacy that last night he had confessed to killing over 30 people, and the lawyer informed him that he'd arranged a psychiatric evaluation of Gacy at 9 a.m. Gacy said he couldn't think about that since he had things to do, and Gacy took off. What? Where the police arrest him? His lawyers begged you to arrest him. His lawyers, police! What the The same morning, police submitted a search warrant application for Gacy's house using the photo receipt to link Robert Pice to Gacy's home, using the testimonies of Rossi and Cram to point a finger at the crawl space, and using the surveillance team's detection of the smelling of rotting flesh as probable cause. A judge granted a search warrant at 4:30 p.m. Police arrived at 8213 Summerdale that evening. They discovered that Gacy had flooded his entire crawl space with water, impeding the search. Once the water had been pumped out, the smell of rotting flesh became unmistakable. Within the first hour of digging, police uncovered a human arm, a kneecap, 4 femurs, 2 skulls, and a rib cage. Upon finding the first human arm within the first 5 minutes, CSI technician Daniel Gently shouted up from the crawl space, "Arrest him! Murder! I think this place is full of kids." Oh man. This sends chills down my spine. It's fucking scary. I mean, we know what's down there, but it's still like to put yourself in the mind of these guys discovering this now, especially some CSI technician. He's not been incompetent throughout this thing, and he's just in a basement finding it's full of dead teenagers. Good God. Meanwhile, Gacy had progressed into full nervous breakdown. He drove to a gas station where he tried to pay the gas station attendant with a bag of marijuana. The employee immediately handed it to Gacy's surveillance team, claiming Gacy had told him, "The end is coming. These guys are going to kill me." Gacy then drove to the house of fellow contractor Ronald Rode, where Gacy hugged the man, burst into tears, and confessed to murdering around 30 people. He wasn't sure of the exact number. Gacy then met with Michael Rossi and David Cram and confessed the same thing to them. Gacy then had Cram drive him out to his father's grave. As they left, Cram told the police, "I'm really afraid this guy might try to kill himself, and me with him. When we leave here, don't lose us. Please." Police had a suspicion that Gacy was going to try and commit suicide at his father's grave. After consulting with Lieutenant Kozenzak over the radio, they used the pretext of Gacy trying to give the gas station attendant a bag of marijuana to pull Cram over, point a gun in Gacy's ear and arrest him. Not long after, news came through of the horrific collection of bodies found underneath Gacy's house. A further 2 bodies were found, one under Gacy's garage and another under the patio near his outdoor barbecue pit. On December the 22nd, 1978 at 3 a.m., Gacy and his lawyers drew up a formal statement confessing to the murder of around 30 people. Some of the victims Gacy mentioned by name, including Robert Pice, others he said he could not remember. Gacy stated that most of his victims were buried in the crawl space of his house, while he had thrown 4 or 5 victims into the Des Plaines River. Over the next 3 months, 29 bodies were exhumed underneath 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. Several of the victims were found with ropes still tied around their necks or with gags stuffed in their mouths so that they asphyxiated. Several of the victims also had different items, from metal rods to pill bottles, lodged in their anuses. 3 more bodies were found in the Des Plaines River tied to Gacy, but the additional 2 bodies Gacy said he dumped there were never found. All told, 33 victims were definitely tied to Gacy. Police estimated that he may have murdered up to 45 people. To this day, several of the bodies found at 8213 Summerdale have not been identified. Trial and death. John Wayne Gacy spent 300 hours being examined by psychiatrists at Menard Correctional Center throughout the course of 1979. During these interviews, Gacy claimed to have multiple personality disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. Gacy claimed that he had 4 personalities: the contractor, the politician, the clown, and a policeman called Jack Hanley, who hates gays and wants to kill them all. Gacy attributed all of his murders to Jack Hanley, whom he referred to as Bad Jack. Gacy also claimed that during the murders themselves, when Bad Jack took over, he had amnesia and so little or no conscious memory of anything that happened. Someone is spinning a tale. Certainly, Gacy had forced multiple victims into his car by impersonating a police officer and holding the young men at gunpoint. However, if Bad Jack hated gays, that certainly wouldn't explain the multiple reports we have from survivors who said that Gacy's attacks were sexual and ended up in rape or attempted rape, or the fact that he dressed as the clown when he was murdering people on occasion. So that wouldn't make sense either. The sexual nature of these attacks would also accord with Gacy's behavior back in Iowa. As for the amnesia, we only have Gacy's word for it, and it seems a bit too convenient, allowing him to avoid giving incriminating details. Similarly, it's puzzling that some of the attacks, like those on David Cram, seemed to involve the clown persona, not this bad Jack homophobe. Exactly. Furthermore, Gacy's self-diagnosis seems to have played off the Hollywood version of paranoid schizophrenia with concrete different personalities, the sort of thing common in movies but less common in real life. John Wayne Gacy stood trial for 33 murders between February the 6th and March the 12th, 1980. His jury was taken from Rockford, Illinois, because of the immense press that his crimes had generated in Chicago. His lawyers saw fit to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. The defense also suggested at some point that all 33 bodies had died as an accident during erotic asphyxiation, a laughable contention given some bodies bore signs of strangulation and one of stabbing, along with the fact that many of the victims were straight. The prosecution argued that Gacy had full composure of his mind in the several years that he had committed rapes, attempted rapes, and murders against young men. Prosecution psychologists refuted the idea that Gacy had multiple personality disorder. They pointed to how Gacy had on multiple occasions either dug or ordered PDM employees to dig trenches in the crawl space. During the diggings, Gacy would keep a close eye on his employees and make sure they only dug in highly specified places. This confirms that Gacy was fully aware of the locations of the bodies while not in bad Jack mode, since the trench digging happened many days apart from the haze under which Gacy claims to have committed the murders. And Gacy wasn't digging the trenches to bury past victims, he was digging them in anticipation of future ones. Yes, as we well know, it was all massively premeditated. Jeff Rignall, whom Gacy tortured in March 1978, somewhat surprisingly gave testimony for the defense. In recounting the brutality and sadism involved in the attack on Rignall, the defense hoped to establish how no sane person would do such a thing. Rignall, suffering PTSD, wept the entire time he was questioned. Upon cross-examination about the details of his torture, Rignall vomited on the stand and was excused from further testimony. Why would you do this? You don't have to give testimony. If a defense calls you to give testimony, can't you just not do it? Do you have to do it? I guess they could say, you have to give testimony as a witness. Can't you refuse to do that? Jesus, you gotta be able to. I mean, this is horrible for him. Donald Voorhees, whom Gacy had been convicted of sodomizing in 1967, tried to give evidence but was too traumatized to do so and was dismissed. Robert Donnelly, whom Gacy had abducted and tortured in 1977, testified with greater clarity, and although visibly upset, the testimony stuck. While Donnelly was speaking to the prosecution, Gacy burst out laughing at him in the courtroom. At the beginning of March, Gacy wrote to the judge asking for a mistrial. Gacy did not approve of the insanity plea and claimed his lawyers had prevented him from taking the stand in his own defense. Gacy, ever the smooth talker, arrogantly thought that he could lie his way out of this one. Good luck with that. The judge rejected Gacy's request for a mistrial. In closing arguments, the defense argued that Gacy was the subject of homosexual and sadistic compulsions which he could not control. In response, the prosecution argued that the facts of the case showed that Gacy for years was able to evaluate and control his actions by covering up the murders, regardless of how compulsive or monstrous his motives may have been. The prosecution then, with a flair for grotesque drama, displayed the photos of 22 of the victims before flinging them through the open trapdoor to Gacy's crawl space, which had been removed from the house and was on display in the courtroom as evidence. The prosecution then asked the jury to show Gacy the same mercy that he had shown his victims. The jury deliberated. Whoa. So no mercy. I thought they were saying show the mercy by killing them. So they were asking the jury to go away and come back with the death penalty. I think the judge decides on death. No, it's a death penalty. In the death penalty case, does the jury decide whether they get the death penalty or not? Well, I guess we're about to find out. Although he said death. I thought he was not alive. I think he was alive for a while because he did the weird clown paintings in prison. But I don't know if they executed him or not. We're about to find out, aren't we? Maybe they did execute him. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before finding John Wayne guilty of 33 murders. Yes, they deliberated for more than 2 hours before passing 33 death sentences on him. Fucking yes! Gacy was also found guilty of the rape of Robert Peist. He was not convicted for the attacks on Robert Donnelly or Jeff Rignall. Gacy was placed on death row at Menard Correctional Center. He filed several appeals against his sentence. Gacy disputed the validity of the first search warrant on his house in 1978 and the validity of his defense team's insanity plea. When that failed, Gacy began to claim that he had not committed any of the murders, but rather they had all been committed by his PDM employees who had keys to his house. Accordingly, come on, mate. You just give it up, and, it's going to happen now. You're going to die. Accordingly, Gacy only claimed to have, quote-unquote, some knowledge of 5 murders, which the circumstantial evidence overwhelmingly connected him to, namely the murders of McCoy, Bartkovich, Godzik, Schitz, and Peist. It is clear that Gacy felt no remorse and was willing to lie through his teeth to get out of the noose until the very last. The Supreme Court of Illinois rejected Gacy's appeal in 1984, and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeal in 1985. Gacy's petition for a new trial was rejected in 1986. When Gacy appealed the death penalty and asked for life in prison, this too was rejected by the Illinois Supreme Court in 1988 and the U.S. Supreme Court in 1993. On May the 9th, 1994, Gacy was given a last meal of a bucket of KFC, a dozen fried prawns, French fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. 1,000 people gathered outside the site of his execution in Stateville Correctional Center. They chanted for hours for his death, which was delayed by a clog in the IV tube being used for Gacy's execution. But when Gacy was finally killed by lethal injection on May the 10th at 12:58 a.m., the crowd erupted in a massive cheer. Gacy's last words before being put to death: "Kiss my ass." You fucking dickhead. Dismembered appendices. Number 1. On researching this one, I dwelt too long and dug too deep. I can definitively state that I hate John Wayne Gacy. Not hard to hate. And, good news. He's dead, ain't he? Penis. Number 2. Gacy's house was demolished in April 1979. As Chicago developed and continued to grow in size, a new house was inevitably built on the land and significantly reduced property prices given what was once buried there. In 2010, the house was the set of the Asylum horror film that was based on paranormal investigators spending the night in Gacy's house talking to ghosts. That is fucking distasteful. That's more than distasteful. That is... I've got another channel where I often refer to capitalism while being in... horrible people who made this. I know Simon is a big ghost hunting buff, so I thought I'd appreciate that. I don't appreciate it. You just that's not cool. Number 3. Although the official body count is 33, some estimates range up to 45. Numerous bodies found at 8213 Summerdale have not been identified, and theorists have suspected that Gacy buried bodies at other sites around Chicago in his capacity as owner of PDM contractors. For instance, a retired police officer has alleged that Gacy dug more trenches in an apartment building on West Miami Avenue, where he served as a caretaker. Sniffer dogs and ground-penetrating radar have not yielded signs of any bodies, and to this day, no excavation has been attempted. Number 4. While in prison, Gacy produced several paintings, mostly of clowns, including those of Pogo and Michael Rossi's character Patches. Gacy also paints pictures of Jesus, birds, 8213 Summerdale skulls, John Dillinger, and Disney's Seven Dwarfs. His paintings have sold for between $200,000 and $20,000 at auction. In the past 4 decades, family members of Gacy's victims have already purchased and publicly burned some of these paintings. Yeah, I was just saying, what'd be fun? What'd be a good thing to do? I mean, you can't do it all at once, but to buy up all of these and destroy them, just quietly. Like, get a GoFundMe going, and we'll just buy all of Gacy's paintings, and we'll destroy them. That'd be a nice thing to do. I mean, I'm sure there's be some in public collections, but any ones that make it publicly, any ones that come out or remind people of this piece of shit, they should be purchased. There should be a fund for purchasing these, and you could burn them all, so this piece of shit's arts never come out again. That'd be real nice. But the problem is, if you start buying them like that as some sort of collective, as a group, a GoFundMe, whatever, then they're going to go up in value. Supply and demand, which is disgusting. It'd be good to destroy all of those, wouldn't it? That'd be fun. Number 5. In the 2 years prior to his execution, Gacy wrote a book called A Question of Doubt, The John Wayne Gacy Story. It's a rambling, solipsistic version of events where Gacy attempts to whitewash himself of any true guilt. Most copies of this book were destroyed before they were ever released to the public. The ones in circulation today come with a hand-signed letter from Gacy himself saying, "Greetings, reader. There are always at least 2 sides to a story. Thank you now for reading it from my point of view, John Wayne Gacy." Copies of these books sell for between $1,500 and $5,000, and that price will probably jump now that they've been mentioned in this video. I think, fortunately, we're not quite big enough to move the price on Gacy books, and hopefully no one listening to this is like, ooh, that sounds like a good buy. If you are thinking that, check yourself. Number 6. Although John Wayne Gacy was only charged and convicted of 33 murders, many analysts today are convinced that that Gacy acted with an accomplice. I mean, we know he was, because there was the one person with the brown hair in the torture. So we know someone at some point. The most likely suspect is Michael Rossi, aka Patches the Clown. He was identified by Rignall as a participant in his torture, and he willingly gave Gacy a false alibi while in civil court. He's also heavily implicated in the murder of John Schitz, having been at 8213 Summerdale the night of the murder, and having gained use of Schitz's car. Gacy also claims that Rossi was his lover. Rossi then seems to have sold Gacy out when police got too close in December 1978. Okay, yeah, that's why. Because remember, he called in and he said, you might want to look into this, which was weird. Gacy pointed the finger directly at Rossi after his conviction, as he did towards David Cram. The latter is less likely to have been an accomplice given his testimony and behavior at the time of Gacy's arrest. That said, if true, if Cram was an accomplice, it is possible his accounts of Gacy's attempted rapes were lies. Gacy also implicated several other PDM employees, including Ed Hefner, Philip Pask, Robert Young, and an unnamed employee who was the roommate of one of the murder victims, John Mowry. Gacy has also been connected to John Norman, who ran a sex trafficking ring in Chicago in the late 1970s. Then there are hazier implications that Gacy was connected criminally to other members of the Chicago Democratic Party, just as with the JCs in Iowa. If true, this might explain why it took so long for the police to actually prosecute Gacy, despite the numerous red flags and accusations made against him over the years. It is a distinct possibility that someone high up in the Chicago police or government was protecting him. And it goes without saying that none of these potential accomplices are ever likely to be discovered and brought to justice, especially now that we're talking 40 years later. 30 years or something. It's a long time later. That's the end of today's episode.
Good. It was awful. Oh, I feel sick even thinking about it.
Yeah, Pedro Lopez in this one. 2 of the most intense episodes I've ever made. I don't really know what to say at the end of these. It's just, that's it. Thanks for being here.